evening and welcome. I am Councillor Dennis Bennyworth, Chairman of Western Area Planning Committee. Members of the committee joining me this evening are Councillor Tony Vickers, who's the Vice Chairman, Phil Barnett, Jeff Cant, James Cole, Caroline Culver, Claire Rolls, Howard Wollaston and Andy Moore. The following officers are attending to advise and support the meeting. We have Simon Till, the Team Leader of Western Area Planning Committee, Sean Cutts, Senior Planning Officer, Cheyenne Kirby, also Senior Planning Officer, Paul Goddard, who's our Highways Officer, Kim Marr, Legal Advisor, Jack Karimi, our Clerk, and Thomas Dunn, our Zoom host. Before we start, I'd like to explain for the benefit of those watching that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with the councillors present in the meeting area. Representatives making a presentation to the committee have been encouraged to do so remotely via Zoom, but those here in person are equally welcome. The meeting is also being live streamed on YouTube. Please can I ask everyone present in the meeting area to make sure they have their microphone placed in front of them and speak directly into it. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route, which will be shown to us by the trained officers present. And please follow any instruction given by those officers. The assembly point is in the Market Street multi-storey car park. Anyone requiring assistance down the stairs will be assisted accordingly by our trained officers. Do members have any questions about the way in which this meeting will be conducted before we proceed? No. Item one, apologies. Mr. Karimi, have we received any apologies for this evening, please?
We've received apologies from Councillors Clive Hooker and Adrian Abbs, and Councillors James Cole and Andy Moore are substituting for them.
Thank you very much. On to what actually was one of the weightier parts of tonight's agenda, item 2, the minutes.
Chairman, may I make a point of order here?
Councillor Wollaston, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It seems to be unreasonable to have 4 sets of minutes, some which go back to November, which is over nearly 4 months ago, and for members to be expected to remember. So can I put in a request that perhaps they are produced for the next meeting in future?
I think, Mrs. Marr, would you like to make comment on that, please?
Yes, I can proffer apologies. There's been periods of leave and also illness that's contributed to them being late, and I can confirm everything is up to date now, and moving forward they will be in a timely fashion presented.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wollaston, and thank you, Mrs. Marr. And hopefully we are now, this will get us pretty much back up to speed. So we'll take these individually, and starting with the meeting of the 3rd of November. Members, do you have any observations for the minutes from the 3rd of November, please? I'm going to start the ball rolling with some just typos, please. Page 7, point number 8, park should read parking. Against number 9 on the same page, the second point down, the applicant never had been approached, the residents for consultation doesn't scan. Can we just tighten that one up, please? On page 21, point 85, second sentence down, circumventing the process and I would be preferable should read it. Page 23, 1, 2, 3, fourth point down, midway through that paragraph, lots of the older houses do not off-road parking should read not have off-road parking. And this is just to show you that I did read the minutes. That was all I had on that.
I'm impressed, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Vickers. I would like to propose that they are a true record.
Chairman, sorry, I have something as well.
I do apologise, Councillor Wollaston.
Page 18 at the top, I'm not a member of Lambourne Parish Council. And similarly on page 22, I'm not a member of Lambourne Parish Council.
Thank you, Councillor Wollaston. That's noted. Members, anything else on that set of minutes from the 3rd of November? I would then like to propose they're a true record. Can I find a seconder, please? Councillor Vickers, thank you very much. Members in favour, show of hands, please.
Chairman, I wasn't on the committee at that point.
Thank you, Councillor Rolls.
Nor was I.
Councillor Moore, thank you very much. That is approved. Moving then swiftly on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of November. I will again start the front page there. It looks as though we had just two members on the committee. Councillors present reads Jeff Beck, substituting for Councillor Cant, and Annie Moore substituting in place of Phil Barnett. That was the entire extent of the committee. We can just tidy that one up, please. I think on that one, that was all from me. Members, anything else, any other observations from the 24th of November minutes? If there are no, I will then propose they're a true record. Do I find a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Culver. Members in favour, please, a show of hands.
Chairman, I wasn't present at that meeting.
Chairman, ditto.
Yeah, me neither. So
Thank you, councillors. Does that give a sufficient number to approve those? Members, I'll take a physical show of hands, please, for those present on the 24th of November.
I was there, even though it doesn't say so.
We have four: Councillor Culver, Councillor Moore, Councillor Vickers, Councillor Bennyworth.
Depends how many sat, doesn't it? We don't know how many sat. We don't know whether there was a majority, so we might have to come back to that. But I think it's
If there were 9,
if there were 9, but were there? Because we haven't got the list at the top.
there would have been a maximum of 9, and that's not sufficient.
Chairman, have we taken abstentions and those against? I think we'll have a majority because I don't think anybody will oppose them, will they?
No, or can we take it then that we can approve it on the understanding that there were sufficient numbers? Yes, okay, we'll do that. Thank you very much. Thank you, members. Moving on then, please, to the minutes of the 15th of December. I've got a couple. On page 66.8, typo, team should read teams, and page 69, Councillor Wollaston, this was something. Would you have said, Councillor Wollaston, in response to assertions that the site was too far from the town centre, Councillor Wollaston stated that the majority of clubs in the lower leagues had grounds on the edge of town, such as Basingstoke, Thatcham, Hungerford, Reading. Would you consider those to be lower leagues, or no? I think the lower leagues.
No.
The lower leagues could be altered to something more appropriate, I think, in that case. Members, any other observations on the minutes of the 15th of December? Councillor Cole.
Thank you. Yes, I have one on page 68, item 23, which doesn't seem to quite follow. If that was the question I asked, certainly the response doesn't make much sense. Perhaps that could be checked as to what was actually asked and responded.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Mrs. Meyer, is that something we can do that through the video, Councillor Cole? Thank you very much. Members, anything else? Any other observations from that set of minutes? I will then propose that they're a true record. Can I find a seconder, please? Councillor Culver, thank you very much. Members, a show of hands, please. Those are approved. Members, with your indulgence, I'll just sign those and hand them back to our clerk.
Chairman, there are minutes of the 12th of January as well.
Some more, you are quite correct. Thank you very much. Members, the minutes of the 12th of January. Do members have observations, please? Nothing? No? Councillor Culver.
Page 103, about halfway down, it said the proposed development saw the demolition of existing facilities. These were no longer viable because the site was closed, not that they were not being used. I think the end of that sentence ought to read, not that they were not needed, because the facility's closed at the moment. So it's not that it isn't needed, people just can't get into it.
Okay,
Thank you, Chairman.
thank you very much. And that's everything on that one. Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I specifically referred in that meeting to feeling a little bit uncomfortable about pressure on at the end of the debate from officers, and I can't see that recorded. So I'm happy to pick that up after the meeting if that's helpful, unless I've missed it in the minutes.
Did you want that noted in these minutes, Councillor Rose?
Yes,
You did? Okay.
I'm happy to pick that up in terms of wording afterwards, if that's helpful.
Mrs. Marr, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rose. Members, is that everything else to do with Councillor Kant? I'll propose that then if members are happy that there are no further amendments. Councillor Kant, second. Thank you very much. Members in favour, please. Thank you very much indeed.
Chairman, I hope we will have, because there are still 2 past minutes that we haven't seen, I think. So I hope we'll be up to date next time, fully up to date.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. I do have it on. Yes.
As I understand it, that's correct.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mrs. Marr. Members, I'll just sign these and then we'll get going to the business in hand this evening. Members, thank you for that. And yeah, hopefully we're going to be back up to speed with those minutes now going forward. Item 3 now, declarations of interest. Do members wish to make a declaration of interest on any items in tonight's agenda? Councillor Vickers.
I've been lobbied on the first item we're about to deal with.
I'd like also to add the fact that I've been lobbied on that. Also, I've got Councillor Wollaston next, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I've been lobbied by the objectors on item number 1 and by the objectors and the applicant on number 2. And I'm also the ward member for number 2.
Thank you, Councillor Wollaston. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been lobbied on both items, but I'll make my decision tonight based on the evidence presented in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. Councillor Barnett.
Exactly the same as Councillor Culver. Thank you.
Councillor Barnett. Members, anything else? Councillor
I'd
Kent.
say ditto as the other members. I've been lobbied on both applications.
That's noted. Thank you, Councillor Camp. Okay, Councillor Cole. Sorry.
Likewise, in terms of receipt of emails.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. I've got someone, some feedback there.
Yeah, sorry, my screen.
We'll just take a minute, Councillor. Do we have any feedback there now? Or are we good? We're good. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, moving on now to, sorry, Councillor Wilson, your hand raised. Okay, thank you. Item 4 of tonight's agenda. For those of you who are new to the meeting, I'll explain briefly how this will work. Officers will make a presentation to the committee, after which the following groups might wish to make representations for a maximum of 5 minutes. The parish or town council representatives, objectors, supporters, the applicant and or agent, and then the ward member. Following this, the committee members will have the opportunity to ask questions of clarification of the speakers and officers. The committee will then debate the application and vote on the decision. There are 2 applications on the agenda for this evening. Mrs. Cutts, would you like to begin your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Hello. Okay. Thank you, Chairman. All right. I will just start to share my screen. Thank you. Yeah. There we go. Right. Thank you, Chairman. This application is proposing the erection of a farm shop associated with the Swan Inn pub in Great Shefford. As the name of the public house has changed, I will be referring to it as the Great Shefford. The Great Shefford is a Grade 2 listed building dating back to the early 19th century, and it has been in use as a public house since 1847. The single-storey 3-bay garage as part of the building is a mid-20th century extension to the building, and historical photographs have shown that there was previously a building at right angles to that in this kind of area here. No, up here, sorry. It is proposed to construct a building to house the farm shop at the end of the car park, which is 16 metres long by 3 metres deep, with a floor area of 48 square metres within the pub car park, as you can see on the site plan here. The building has a height to eaves of 3 metres, and the height to the ridge of the building is 4.6 metres. And in comparison to the pub building itself, the garage is approximately 4 metres high. The application includes a ramp at the front of the building and has also been elevated on a plinth so that floodwater can flow under the building. The application has been amended to include alterations to the front elevation to make it more appropriate to the setting of the listed building. And the amended plans also show some landscaping between the building and the edge of the site. The building is proposed to be timber-clad with a slate roof and is to be operated in conjunction with the Great Shefford pub. The report outlines the planning history of the site, including applications made since 2019 when the pub came under new management. This included a hot food kiosk in the car park. However, this was refused planning permission. The report before you outlines the consultation responses, which includes objections from Great Shefford Parish Council due to parking and traffic issues and concerns about impacts on the village shop, which houses the post office. East Garston Parish Council also objected as they were concerned about the impact on the village shop and post office. The highways officer has not raised any objections, but has suggested limited opening hours to 7 a.m. from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays and 7 a.m. to 12 noon on weekends and public holidays. I'm sure your highways officer will report further on the parking and highway safety matters. A parking survey is also included within the update sheet, as well as details about the proposed opening hours. The local lead flood authority originally raised concerns about the flood risk. However, a flood risk assessment was submitted, and given the provision of the flood void, has raised no objections. The Environment Agency have not raised any objections and have advised that further consents may be required from them due to the proximity to the river. The Conservation Officer originally objected to the proposal due to the impact on the setting of the listed building. However, following the submission of historical photographs and mapping of a building at right angles, kind of aligning with the edge of the original building, this objection was removed due to the historical precedent that was clearly provided. And again, the amendments to the elevations of the building have also overcome other objections that had been raised by the Conservation Officer. There have been a number of public representations from 65 contributors. 36 of those were in support and 28 objected. Some of the objections have been reiterated since the publication of the report and outlined in the update sheet. Now, to summarise the objections, as you can see, there are a lot, but they can generally fall under these categories due to the parking and highway safety risk, flood risk, appearance of the building and impact on the listed building, noise and disturbance to residents, pollution risks, lack of evidence that the farm shop is required for the viability of the pub, concern that it will be a hot food takeaway as previously refused, lack of storage and waste facilities, inconsistencies in the application, concerns about whether about uses within Class E, the different opening times that were proposed, lack of hand washing facilities in the building, the impact on the village shop. Concerns about parking also included photographs of overspill parking in surrounding streets and concern about unauthorised developments on the site. And there were also concerns that details in the application have not been substantiated. Those points raised in support of the application are that it will be a benefit to the village, it will support local businesses, reduce the need to travel, diversify the pub, which is at the heart of the community, support jobs, local shopping, will not affect the viability of the village shop, and that the opening hours overcome the parking issues. They say a shop also fits within the status of Great Shefford as a service village, that the additional traffic will not be significant within the context of the A338, that flood prevention works have been carried out. And whilst the pub flooded in 2014, the area where the shop is proposed to be sited did not. Also, that it will be a sympathetic addition to the site. The main issues in this application are outlined in the report, but I wish to highlight the following: the principle of development, the design impact and the impact on the listed building and OMB, impact on neighbouring amenity. The matters of flood risk and sustainability are also dealt with in the report, and your highways officer will address highway safety and parking matters. So, taking the principle of development, the application site is within the settlement boundary of Great Shefford, which is identified as a service village within policy ADPP1. And it says that there are a limited range of services with some potential for development. Policy CS10 seeks to encourage developments which will diversify the rural economy, particularly in locations in service villages, and it supports small and medium-sized businesses to provide job opportunities and maintain the vitality of smaller rural settlements such as Great Shefford. Policy Shop 5 also encourages the provision of local shops in local communities where they do not adversely affect viability of nearby shops. This proposal is seeking to diversify a rural pub, and the Public Houses SPG also encourages pub diversification where it does not undermine the functioning of the key facility. The MPPF also seeks the development of local services such as shops and pubs. This application is proposing a pub to be run as part of the management of the existing Great Shefford. The business plans and supporting statements refer to the sale of local produce and up to 9 jobs being provided. These are likely to be part-time jobs given the size of the building and the clarification about lunchtime staffing, which has been provided in the update sheet. As stated, there have been objections raised and concern about the impact on the village shop, which also houses the post office. However, the planning system does not prevent competition, and it is suggested that the proposed shop will provide different goods and services to those provided within the village shop, and therefore expanding the range of services and benefiting the wider economy of the village. Due to recent changes in the use classes order, a shop is now a Class E use. This includes a wide range of developments such as offices and other uses, in order to ensure that the building is only used for a shop and not for other purposes such as a cafe, and to ensure that the proposal is carried out in the way that we have assessed it. A condition is recommended that the proposal is only used as a shop within Class EA of the use class order. And so it limits it so that they won't be able to change to other uses within Class E. Also, it's intended that the shop will be operated as part of the pub and to provide long-term viability and income stream for the pub. And so we are recommending a condition which links the management of the shop to the management of the pub. Moving on to the design issues, there were originally objections to the design and siting of the building within the setting of Great Shefford, the public house, and Great Shefford, the village. However, the submission of the historical evidence indicating a smaller building in close proximity to the main pub building, and said here kind of where this 4x4 is cited in my photograph, that has overcome the previous objections about the setting, as it had been anticipated that there were wider settings originally of the building. So taking into account this historical precedent and the amendments to the scheme, there are no longer any objections to the impact that the proposed building will have on the setting of the listed building. There have been a number of objections raised about noise and disturbance to residents. The Environmental Health Officer has not raised any objections to the application, and a condition is recommended that should any external plant be required for chiller units, that will be the subject of a separate application. In addition, the restrictions to Class E use also limit potentially noisy developments for residents. Other matters that have been raised in the objections refer to things such as unauthorised developments on the site. These are matters which are under an investigation and do not relate directly to the proposed farm shop, which is under consideration. There have also been concerns about whether the ramp is the correct size. However, this is a building control matter. There were concerns about whether hand washing facilities are provided in the building. And again, this is a separate matter under food safety legislation. The proposal is for a shop to be operated in conjunction with the Great Shefford Public House and as an additional income stream to that business. The proposal is considered to be a benefit to the rural economy, even if not all of the benefits which have been suggested by the applicant in the supporting documents can be substantiated. It will increase the number of services in the village, and the proposal is not considered to be harmful to the setting of the listed building or character and appearance of the area. The proposed conditions seek to overcome concerns about parking, highway safety, flood risk and neighbouring amenity, and the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions outlined in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Katz. We now move on to highways and Mr. Goddard. Mr. Goddard, do you have any comments you'd like to make on this application, please?
I do. Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members. From a highways point of view, let's mention access first. The access, we've taken the view, is long established and existing and should accommodate any additional traffic from this proposal. Regarding traffic levels, as is often the case with new retail outlets, much research over the years has shown that most traffic that visits a new retail outlet is already existing to the network. Only about 30% thereabouts of traffic visiting a new retail outlet is new to the network. The vast majority is already passing by to and from other destinations, and in this case would be linked being that the journeys will already take place to and from the public house. Visitors to the public house will, I'm sure, frequently visit the farm shop and vice versa. Therefore, we've taken the view that any limited increase in traffic generation, considering the existing overall volumes on the A338, should not cause any noticeable impact. Let's talk about parking. Sian Cutts just now showed you a plan showing 26 proposed car parking spaces, and that plan is secured by one of the conditions within your committee report. Existing parking provision within the site is 27, and we've arrived at that figure from viewing the planning history of the site and checking aerial photographs from 2018. So the proposal will result in the loss of one car parking space. It is considered that that limited loss is not sufficient to warrant objection. Much concern has been raised by the local community on the potential for car parking to overspill from the public house onto surrounding streets. And some objectors have sent in some photographs that have been taken on a handful of occasions over the last 2 years. Now, I'm not saying that it's limited to a handful of occasions. There may have been other occasions that perhaps they didn't record. But the concerns are enough for your highway officers to respond to them. And we've responded to them in 2 ways. Firstly, we've applied a condition limiting opening hours, restricting the farm shop being open when the public house is at its most busiest. The times we've put forward are quite stringent. I know they're stringent because at times the applicant has raised concern about them, but we've stuck to our guns here. I consider that the farm shop should not be open after 6 o'clock any weekday and should not be open after midday at weekends and bank holidays. The second thing your highway officers have done, along with assistance from planning officers, is that we have made a total of 13 visits to the location over the last 5 weeks. And we've counted cars in the car park. We've been able to sort of develop a profile of parking throughout the day. And clearly during the mornings and in the afternoons, the usage of the car park is very limited. At lunchtimes, as you would expect, the car parking does get a bit more full. But at no point did we find that the car parking was overflowing onto the adjacent highway. In saying that, I expect during the course of the year, I'm sure there are occasions when the car parking from the public house does overspill onto the adjoining highway network. But clearly, it doesn't seem to be every day, and it doesn't seem to be every weekend. I expect that the number of times are fairly limited, but I'm not dismissing this. We also need to consider that when parking does overspill onto the streets, what is the harm from an objection point of view? How common is it, for instance, that a successful village pub at times would have parking overspilling onto neighbouring streets? Furthermore, from the photographs submitted, it would seem that when parking does overspill, it predominantly parks in Church Street, which is the road that goes off opposite the bend for the public house. We would not consider from a high risk point of view that the occasional few vehicles parked on street for a successful pub is enough to demonstrate harm and warrant refusal. So therefore, from the evidence put before us and the evidence gathered by your highway officers raised no objection to this proposal, subject to all the conditions contained in the report, including the opening hours. Thank you, Chairman.
And thank you very much, Mr. Goddard. We now move on to our speakers this evening. Mr. Dunn, can I ask you to invite the agent's representative into the meeting, please? We've got Sharon Brentnell joining us. Thank you very much indeed. Sharon Brentnell, can I ask you please to turn on your video and unmute yourself? There you are. And we can all see you. Thank you very much for doing that. Good evening to you, and thank you for joining us. You'll have 5 minutes to make your presentation. After 4 minutes, I'll give you notice, and should you require it, and then with 10 seconds to go, I will say, and in conclusion, and then ask you to stop. If you're ready to make your presentation, fingers just on the button here, and the clock will start when you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee, for allowing me to speak this evening. My name is Sharon Brentnell from Bluestone Planning, and I'm representing the applicants, Mr. Khan and Ms. Karras, who are also attending remotely. Since 2001, West Berkshire District has lost 35 public houses, with 60% of those lost in the last 10 years alone. With supermarkets undercutting pub prices, it's essential to remain viable, and such a rural pub does not just offer somewhere to buy a drink. Diversification is key to the survival of a village pub, and it needs to move with the current needs and demands of the customer base. The food provision at the pub has changed significantly in the last couple of years, and it now has an excellent reputation. However, the financial stability of a village pub can change quickly, as COVID has shown. It's essential that both with the declaring of a climate emergency and with the current situation with regard to oil and gas prices and supplies, that we look more carefully at sustainability and how to support our local area. The applicants have set up a local supply chain for the produce to be sold in the farm shop, such that they are not reliant on produce being shipped a great distance. This ensures less pollution and fuel use and promotes local employment in the wider supply chain. The farm shop will be run by the pub and not as a separate entity. The applicants are passionate about high quality and locally supplied produce. It is intended that the shop and pub are to be a linked business, such that one can visit the pub and then pick up food later to take home, for example, or the ingredients sold in the farm shop will also be used in the meals that the pub prepares. Furthermore, this farm shop will help to support local producers and thus provide spin-off benefits to the local rural economy beyond the immediate benefits to the viability of the pub. It is understood that there are concerns regarding parking, and we are happy to comply with the conditions proposed in this regard, including those of opening hours. In particular, if one looks at the key periods of use for a farm shop, the busiest periods are usually between 9 AM and 12 PM. On this basis, it is clear that the two uses would work in tandem to make best use of the pub facilities. It should also be noted that to address concerns, the pub has recently entered into an agreement with a nearby business to ensure that any staff who normally drive are able to park off-site during the busiest times. The applicants have also raised issues that the car park is often used by persons not using the pub, and this can distort numbers on occasion. But if such problems continue, this can be addressed by the applicants bringing in parking restrictions to the site to ensure that parking spaces are free for customers only. The applicants have put significant financial and personal commitment into this public house, and this has been evidenced by the many letters of support for the application. Whilst many publicans have not managed to continue a viable business, particularly during COVID, the applicants have continued to strive to make improvements to their business. The pub as it stands is a vibrant heart of the community, and whilst it has an outstanding restaurant, it's still very much a pub, with around 45% of all takings being derived from drink sales, not associated with food provision. It employs local people, up to 20 staff at any one time, obviously all not together, and it is proposed that the farm shop will continue in this approach. Local people have stated that they consider the pub and the proposed farm shop to be a well-designed and welcome asset, and that the small rural businesses such as these need our support, particularly where they are to provide jobs close to home. Whilst the focus is largely upon objectives, in this case there are more letters of support than there are objections, and this should be borne in mind. We hope that you are able to endorse your officer's recommendation and support these proposals to diversify the business and enable the pub to continue to be a valuable community asset to the area. Thank you.
That is very kind. Thank you very much indeed. Members, do we have any questions from our, the agent there, please? I've got Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Brentnall, you referred to local farm and supplies and not having to travel too far, and that's thoroughly desirable. But what do you call local? I mean, would Dorset or Warwickshire be local? And how is that sort of enforced, or is it indeed enforceable? I mean, if it's a planning matter, I can ask the officer, but that's my question to you.
So to date, the applicants have set up a number of suppliers with, for example, Vickers Game, which I'm sure you're familiar with as a local supplier. They are intending to not enter into agreements with anyone outside of a certain radius distance, preferably within the district if possible, or within the county, or obviously we are closer to certain borders of different areas, but within a certain distance, yes, absolutely. And they have provided a number of examples of different agreements that they've had to date.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Councillor Barnett.
Through you, Chairman. Thanks for your presentation. In regard the actual sales, obviously Councillor Vickers has just spoke about the distribution from various different local places, but in relationship to the needs of the villagers, clearly certain times during the day one would presumably consider that one would have to go to the public house for cigarette and alcohol sales, because I would imagine that's not going to be included within the farm shop. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, all right. So clearly certain times of the day when the pub's closed, they would have to wait until the pub opened to purchase anything in that category. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. I'll just chip in there, Councillor Moore, with your permission. Just really following on from Councillor Barnett. You mentioned the produce that will be sold. Is there any danger of crossover at all between there and the village shop?
It's a completely different business model. So the items that are going to be sold in the farm shop are not the same. They're not going to be newsagents materials. They're not going to be those things that you associate with the convenience store. They are, the local produce as a farm shop. So they are a very different business model.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. I was going to ask you a question about the height of the building, because that's caused some little concern, and really whether there was any scope to actually reduce the height. And then when I started looking, it having been stated on several occasions that it's 4.6 metres high, I couldn't find that dimension on any of the plans. Can you point to me where that is actually stated on your plans, which are part of the conditions for construction?
I think, unfortunately, it's not stated on the plan, but the plans are to scale. So if you measure them, which they are, Sian Cutts has measured them, and that's where she has derived that information from as well. So being that the plans are to scale, they are part of the, approved drawings to that height.
I think, thank you very much. I think, Councillor Moore, if that's something we direct to the case officer.
I shall do that.
Clarification,
I trust they've noted that. I think it might be best to be actually on the plans itself, which we'll follow up. So that having been said, going back to my first question, has there been any consideration to reducing that height at all? And is there any possibility of doing that?
Without checking with my client, it's difficult to say. I don't know the exact details for why they need the height specifically. There may be particular ventilation and ceiling requirements, but I'm unaware of that, unfortunately. But I can provide you with that if necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, Councillor Moore, I think that's something we can ask clarification of from Mrs. Cutts. But we are looking at the plan in front of us this evening and making our judgment based on that. Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Rolls.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I don't want to labour this point. My hand was going up and down because I wasn't quite sure whether I should sort of repeat the question, but I'm not entirely clear how this is different from the two other shops in the village. And could you just give me a bit more sort of information around what exactly you will be selling? I know you talk about local produce, but what are we talking about here that is very different from the post office around the corner and the garage shop?
So these are all fresh produce. So then we're not talking about packaged meats or those sort of packaged products. We're talking about freshly prepared, butchered meats, etc. We are talking about fresh cheeses and those fresh vegetables and those sorts of things. So we're talking about minimising packaging and the freshness of produce, with regular deliveries rather than goods which have a longer shelf life that you might find in other convenience stores.
Thank you.
Councillor Rolls, does that answer your question?
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, any further questions? No, I think, Ms. Brentle, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your presentation and your time this evening.
Thank you.
And as Miss Brentle goes to the waiting room, our ward member, sadly, Councillor Hooker, is not able to join us this evening. He's unwell. I have to say, quite surprised, members, that given the strength of feeling there's been in the village, that we don't have the parish council or objectors or indeed supporters talking on this evening. But there we are. I'll move on then, please, to questions of clarifications from our officers. And I've got Councillor Vickers to start me off, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Question to Mrs. Cutts. You referred to people saying that the pub doesn't need this shop to be viable. I mean, is that a planning matter? Does a pub need to demonstrate that it needs to diversify? I know it's allowed to, but is it relevant? And is indeed an associated topic. Does it need, or do we need to be satisfied that it will not harm the viability of what you term, or what is, I think, in the report termed a key facility, which of course will be a post office, if not another shop?
Mrs. Cutts.
Okay, thank you for that. In terms of whether the pub has to prove its viability, its need for the farm shop, it doesn't really. It's not like a situation that we so often have where pubs are closing and we're asking them to prove that they are no longer viable. If a business says that it needs to expand or it has a desire to expand, then we accept that on a whole range of applications and business applications. So I don't think they need to demonstrate that without this they wouldn't be viable. because obviously there may be other things that they, there's a whole range of things that a business can do to expand. And in terms of the other part of your question about the viability, it's very difficult for one business to show that it's not going to affect the viability of another business. In this instance, they're demonstrating that their intention is to sell different products. As the planning authority, we're not here to negotiate between, say one business is more viable than another, or, there is a market out there and it's left in some ways to market forces on a scale of this size. The viability would need to be demonstrated more if you're on the scale of a larger supermarket.
Just as supplementary, to be clear, we are not required to demonstrate that it would damage the viability of the post office. Is that right? We don't need to do that in order to, that wouldn't be a valid reason.
It doesn't.
Sorry, it doesn't, yes.
Thank you. And I note Mr. Till's hand, and I think he wants to come in on this point. Mr. Till?
Thank you, Chairman. In this respect, our role as the local planning authority isn't to regulate competition between businesses. We're not considering things at that fine grain relating to one business operating adjacent to another in a village centre. If we were dealing with a larger scale of developments where we were considering the viability of a town centre, then we have policies that address that. But no, our policies don't go to that fine grain level. Thank you, Councillor. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Vickers, does that answer your...
Yeah, that confirms what I thought, but it's good to have it said by an officer.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Wollaston next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I live about 3 miles away from this pub. I pass it regularly, at least 2 or 3 times a week, and I have partaken of lunch there on a number of occasions. I drove past it yesterday afternoon at 2 o'clock, and the car park was absolutely ram-packed full. And that is quite regular. So I'm really rather astounded, Mr. Goddard, that you think the amount of parking there is so low. It's certainly not the experience I've had, or indeed many other residents have had. If you actually look at the way this pub has developed, and I do think they've done an extremely good job, to be fair, but it's doubled the size of its covers in the last 10 years, and the car parking is reduced significantly from 33 spaces originally. Now, as I understand it, the ramp that's being put in will reduce the car parking, not by 1 space, but by 4. And I wonder whether you'd like to comment on that.
Mr. Goddard.
Chairman, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Wollaston, for your points. As mentioned earlier, we didn't dismiss the fact that at times that car park is full and does overspill onto the road. But from the evidence we've taken, it's not something that occurs every day or at weekends. And I'm repeating myself a little bit here in that regard. Clearly, it doesn't occur every day or every weekend. Certainly it does occur, but the question is does it occur enough to warrant refusal? And when it does occur, does it cause any harm? With regards to the ramp, it's not entirely my area of expertise because it is a building control matter. But my understanding is that the ramp needs to be at least 1.2 metres wide in order to facilitate access and egress by someone in a wheelchair. And should the ramp be that wide, the plan that Mrs. Cutts put up on the screen a while ago is achievable. And if it wasn't achievable, post building control stage and approval of the ramp, then that would be a concern and they would need to come back, I'm assuming, with a fresh planning application. Now, when applicants put in plans, unless there's something glaringly wrong with it, we accept them with good faith. And on this occasion, I've got no reason to doubt that that plan of the 26 car parking spaces cannot be provided within the site as shown. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. I'm going to move on to Councillor Moore, please.
Thank you, Chairman. To return to my earlier question, and then I think for Mrs. Cutts in this case, and really the question is, should the height of the building, which is a bit of an issue, actually be shown definitively on the plan? I note, looking at it, that please do not scale from this drawing unless for planning purposes. Not altogether clear what that actually means, but I infer from that you're not supposed to put a ruler on the drawing and measure the height of the thing, and that should be shown actually on the drawing as indeed the plan is dimensioned. So is that something you might look to do?
Mrs. Cutts, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Councillor Moore and Councillor Bennyworth. It isn't a requirement. When planning applications are submitted, they need to comply with the local list of requirements. That requires that all plans are drawn to scale and show a scale bar. We do not actually make it a requirement of planning applications that they show all measurements. Now, it is helpful when developers do that, but it isn't actually a requirement. The do not scale unless for planning purposes applies in this case. So for planning purposes, we are able to put our scale rule on it, and that's the height that I measured the plans off to be. So I've taken that 4.6 metres from the submitted plans, and I assessed the height of the garage roof from previously submitted plans on some of the other from a previous application on the site, which had a scale plan of the garage on it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mrs. Cutts. Councillor Moore?
Yeah, I mean, it does. It just seems a little open to interpretation potentially, whereas an actual dimension, as indeed you've got for the plan view, would be that much more robust, it seems to me, in ensuring that the building was built as intended. But I'll take the officer's view on that. Could I follow to another question?
Please do. Yeah.
Which is about the historical perspective of the previous building, and how the judgment is made on that. It seemed that the argument was, that this new building comes up perpendicular to the pub, and that might affect views and such like. Oh, we've just discovered a previous building in that same one, but no sort of quality check as to whether that was, a good building, an acceptable building. It just, because it was there, this is now okay. Is that the way the logic works? That's my question.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Mrs. Cutts, do you want to comment on the historical building, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, the application was submitted with a heritage impact assessment, which hadn't referred to the, when it was originally submitted, hadn't referred to the historical pattern of development. And maybe that may have been a better use of wording by myself. And originally, the conservation officer had raised objections because having a building perpendicular to the public house building within the car park was considered to block views of the listed building, particularly from the south, and as you come up from Newbury Road. And in those long views, you would get less view of the public house itself. And that was originally proposed as a reason for refusing the application. However, the agents had done some more research and found photographs dating back to around 1910, which did show that there had been a building perpendicular to the main public house building, And therefore this showed and it was also shown on some of the historic mapping as well. So this showed a historic form and pattern of development around the listed building. And therefore, given that that was a historic layout of the listed building, it was therefore difficult to justify a reason for refusal of a building at right angles to the listed building, which was set further back from it. That would be harder to defend at an appeal. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mrs. Cutts.
I mean, I understand that argument. I suppose I'm left with a question in my own mind as to, how many hundreds of years it might be that you could prove that something was there, and therefore you can conclude something. But so be it if that's the advice we've received. Sorry, could I have one more?
Okay,
and this is
do.
for Mr. Goddard, and it's really about the matter of it's asserted that it's expected that light goods vehicles will supply the farm shop rather than heavy goods vehicles. Is there any sort of underpinning of that or control over that? That would be my question.
Thank you, Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Good question. You are correct. We have been informed that deliveries will take place via transit vans or vehicles of that size. Those vehicles that are smaller than the size of the vehicles that currently service the pub, whether we can limit deliveries to that size, I'm assuming by condition, may be a better question for perhaps my planning colleagues to answer, whether that condition would meet the tests that set out in the NPPF. I would have no objection to such a condition should one need to be applied. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. I'm just going to come in there, please, if I may. Mrs. Cutts, I'm just aware of the existing enforcement issues currently involved with this site. Can you just clarify that those are not considered, or rather we can't consider those or take this into consideration as this part of this application, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. None of the enforcement matters which are being investigated relate to the farm shop development itself.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got Councillor Culver next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just wondering why the Environment Agency element is only an informative rather than a condition, because it seems quite important that they get this separate permit that they need in 6.15. I've got a couple of other questions, if that's all right, Chairman. I note that there's a housing application opposite, a successful housing application. I was just wondering how many houses are going to be there and whether there might be any kind of cumulative impact on flood risk. And also, I was just concerned about the BREEAM. So we've said that it would be unreasonable to reject this on the basis of BREEAM because it's a small building. But I'm just slightly concerned that I know that we've let people off in the past regarding BREEAM. We had Highwood Cops because they didn't have the correct paperwork. And I think we had another application where we let them off as well. But looking back through the previous planning minutes, I couldn't find reference to that, so I could be wrong. So yeah, I'm just wondering, what is our cut-off point for deciding whether or not it's acceptable for an applicant to not meet the BREEAM standard? And finally, Chairman, if I may, would it be acceptable to officers if we were to condition a disabled parking space next to the shop? I noticed there's two at the other end of the car park, but perhaps one next to the shop would be advisable as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. On the BREEAM issue, I'm going to, Mr. Till, is that something you want to pick up on?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I will respond in respect to that. Councillor Culver, it's very understandable that members of this committee would be concerned regarding the administration of BREEAM. We regularly take advice from planning policy in terms of BREEAM and how it can be applied. it becomes impractical in terms of the BREEAM scoring scale with very small buildings. And also there are other criteria for buildings, such as buildings which would spend a lot of time opening or were open-sided. In this particular case, we're dealing with a very small building, which therefore allows very little room for implementation of measures to comply with the BREEAM restrictions. The examples that you raise in terms of Highwood Copse slightly different. In those terms, we had good reason to believe that the applicant had actually been through the exercise of constructing in accordance with the BREEAM requirements of their planning permission, and quite simply, because their contractor had gone bust, they were unable to provide the paper trail for it. That's that messy sort of administration situation. We do, as a council, in those cases, also have to evaluate the public benefit. So in this particular case, officers have evaluated the fact that the building is too small to offer compliance with the BREEAM requirements, and consequently couldn't score on that. The level of impact in this particular case is considered low. If we were dealing with a more substantial building, I would have greater concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Culver, your further questions, who would you like to whom would you like
Sorry,
to direct
yes,
them?
Chairman, it's probably easier if I asked them one by one, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I was just wondering how many houses they have permission to build opposite to the pub. I think it was where a former garage was or something. That's a question for Mrs. Cutts.
Yeah, I can partially answer that. I don't actually know the actual number. The flood risk assessment was submitted with the application, and you asked about the cumulative impact of the flood risk assessment. There was a flood risk assessment that was submitted with the application. On this site, most of the flood risk is actually from surface water flooding rather than from the river flooding, because of the shape of the valley itself. Our local lead flood authority assessed the application and didn't have concerns about it with the provision of the plinth under the building. So I think that would have taken cumulative impact into consideration. You also asked about why the Environment Agency requirements were just informatives. That's because the environmental permits are required under separate legislation to planning. So it's just there under our duty of care obligations to highlight to the developer that there are other requirements that they need to comply with in order to build in close proximity to the river. And making them aware of it. It isn't something we're not able under planning regulation, under planning law, to require something that is required under separate legislation.
Thank you, Mrs. Cutts. And Councillor Culver, on the disabled parking, did you want to ask Mr. Goddard?
Yes, if that's all right.
Thank you, Mr.
you.
Goddard. Can you pick that one up, please?
Yes, I can. I don't know if Sian could put the plan back up on the screen. There's no disabled space proposed for the shop at the moment. My suggestion would be that's it. Yes, I might, if I was to put in additional disabled space, I'd probably put it. Do you see the row of 5 spaces with the star that goes next to the farm shop? I'd probably put the disabled space at the other end because it's probably a bit more easier to access. Or it could go next to the shop. Either way, it can be achieved. Should members wish to have a disabled parking space put in, then I would ask that condition 11 is changed. Instead of plans approved, plans to be submitted. So if members wish, yes, we could put a parking space in there for disabled persons somewhere along that line of spaces that are shown there.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Okay.
Goddard. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move on now to Councillor Rolls, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I welcome that question from Councillor Culver, because I was actually going to raise that myself. It's quite handy to have the plan up, actually, whilst I just asked my first question. So my concern is I have parked in this car park a number of times, and by nature of the way that the car parking spaces are set out, it is actually quite tight to park your car. And if you look at I'm a bit concerned about the location of the parking space right up against the shop. Are we happy that, and I guess it's for Mr. Goddard, are we happy that if you see that along the lower part of the parking spaces, we consider that parking space right up by the shop to be safe in terms of health and safety, in terms of people getting out of their cars? I just wanted comments on that first, and I do have a number of questions.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rolls, for your questions. We have dimensions standards, parking spaces should be 2.4 by 4.8 and aisles between spaces should be 6 metres. Regarding the space right next to the shop there, well, clearly those dimensions are met by a wide margin there. And yes, I've also, along with all my team, have parked in that car park at times in recent weeks, and particularly closer to the pub there, you will see the distance between the spaces there opposite, and the aisle between them is narrow. The only thing I can suggest to that is existing and has been in position for a number of decades, and this proposal, this proposal, that is unchanged. And because it's existing, well, any issues surrounding that would continue as is, with or without the farm shop. I hope that helps.
Thank you. May I just ask another question, Chairman, from Mr. Goddard? You mentioned about cycle stands should be provided for staff and customers, and it could be a condition. Where would those be located if that was a requirement or something that members would encourage? Particularly Councillor Vickers, who's very keen on cycling. There we are.
Mr. Goddard, thank you.
That's a good question. I don't know at this point. What I will do is have a look through the plans and see if we've got anything with regards to cycle stands. I would certainly support their provision. If I could perhaps get back to you on that particular point later on, let me have a look through the drawings again.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. And may I just, sorry, I've just got 2 more questions. You mentioned about, I'm very familiar with the road. I live quite closely down the road as well. And it is quite a nasty sharp corner there where it goes round as you pull out and go round to the right of the pub. We're talking about potential overflow onto the road. And we're talking about a tight bend there. I noticed that you suggest that such bends assist in reducing vehicle speeds. But I'm just concerned that are we looking at a scenario where we could have potential overflow, we could have delivery vans, we could have a planning application opposite with more vehicles or potential more people. I'm just concerned this is going to get quite congested, and we seem to be filling up the car park with lots of other things that will limit the number of spaces. I just wonder what your comments were on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, the development opposite, I can perhaps give a bit of information on. It was for 3 dwellings, and it was approved with planning application 18/02877 FULD. The development has been completed. It was provided with sufficient car parking and complied with our car parking standards introduced in 2017. The bend there, from our observations and from photographs submitted by objectors, no parking when it did overspill onto the road took place on that bend. And I really don't think if anybody was remotely not sensible would park their car there. And from the observations that we've made and from the objector's photographs, any car parking when it does overspill onto the adjoining streets takes place predominantly within Church Street, which is the road that goes off the bend opposite. So it's off the main A338. And we're quite pleased about that. And we would not want parking to take place on the A338 itself or anywhere near that bend. And it doesn't look like that happens from our observations. I agree with you, and this is a point that perhaps I should have made earlier on, that the car park is filling up. From the results that we have taken, that car park is nearing full, some lunchtimes. And Councillor Wollaston indeed picked that up with his comments just now. And what I would say to that, to the applicants and to the applicant's agent, is that I think should this proposal get approved, I think that's then your limit. You should not be applying for anything else, because I think if anything else gets applied for, that adds even more to that car park. I think you may find that the local highway authority might consider objecting to any more proposals on this site. You know, I think that this proposal is probably enough in my view and from the observations that we've made. Thank you.
Councillor Rose, was there
I just have one more question. I'm
Okay.
sorry. In terms of the delivery vans, and I know Councillor Moore raised this point about a condition. Can we actually do that? Because it seems to be we are limiting future. You know, if they wanted to have different supplies, a supplier, that we're saying they have to limit it to a certain vehicle. Are we able to do that from a sort of competition point of view? And
Thank you, Councillor Rose. I'll piggyback on the back of that question as well, if I may, and just ask that the pub clearly, this is to Mr. Goddard, clearly has deliveries, those being presumably large brewers, dray, turning up with barrels of beer. The precedent is there, is it not?
Chairman, yes, it is. And some of the applicants, the photographs they've shown has shown lorries making deliveries within the car park. And on one of my visits and some of the visits of my team, that there were deliveries taking place. And yes, the lorries are already taking place. It's already an issue. The deliveries seem to take place mostly within the car park. But whether you wish to apply a condition and whether it's reasonable or not, I would pass you over to the planning officers, if I may.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Mrs. Cutts.
Chairman, if I might
Please do, Mr. Till.
respond to
Yes.
this question. Members, when considering conditions, we have to consider two matters set out in the MPPF amongst other tests. And those are whether the conditions can be said to be reasonable and whether they can be said to be enforceable. In this case, because we would be seeking to apply a condition that not only restricted the activities of the applicant, but sought to restrict the activities of suppliers to the applicant, we would be going beyond the grounds of what was reasonable. There would be no way to enforce upon that condition. If a delivery vehicle sets out at 4 a.m. with a stack of goods on it, and the operator chooses to stack that onto an HGV, the applicant has no control of that matter. All they could do is turn away the delivery at their end, which would essentially not mitigate the harm that had already occurred in terms of the concerns being raised. So your officer's strong advice on this is that that would be an unreasonable and unenforceable condition to apply.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Mr. Goddard, I note your hand. Would you like to come in there, please?
I was just wanting to come back on Councillor Roll's good point on cycle stands. I've not found any plans submitted of that, but we have requested details, and that is covered within your condition 12, that details would be submitted on cycle storage. So we would expect that condition to be discharged at some point and some cycle storage provided within the site. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goddard. And Councillor Rolls, that's you out now, is it? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Barnett next, please.
Chairman, I've got two questions. Firstly, for Mr. Goddard, obviously there's a lot of concern regarding the amount of vehicles that could or might be either visiting the site or parking somewhere nearby. Obviously, it would be encouraging to see some of the local people, especially the left-hand side of the 339, to walk across if possible. I would imagine that now anybody wishing to cross that road will actually walk towards the bridge and cross over at the point where vehicles are travelling reasonably slow. But if they were to cross over close to where the siting of this proposal is going to be sited, that could be very close to that nasty bend where vehicles do come down the hill at quite a rate, and it'd be a last minute notice in somebody's trying to cross the road and a vehicle is immediately coming close to them. Do you feel that that's safe crossing the road at that point?
And that's a question to Mr. Goddard, is it?
To Mr. Goddard, yes.
Mr. Goddard?
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Can I just make it clear? You're not, well, I suppose you are. You're not mentioning the bend immediately adjacent in front of the pub. You're mentioning the bend from the south. Yeah, the bend where traffic comes down into the village from the south, from the Hungerford direction.
Correct.
The bend there, okay. Let me just take a couple of measurements for you. The bend is some 100 metres away, and so therefore I consider that the bend is of more than sufficient distance for any vehicles coming round that bend to the south in seeing any pedestrians crossing adjacent the proposal. Hope that helps.
Okay, all right. Well, I just wanted your expertise on that.
And you have a further question, Councillor?
The other question, members will remember, I did ask the applicant in regarding what items would be actually kept in the shop. And my thought process was very much based on it's possibly going to be a wooden cladded building in the countryside, which I always feel is not that secure under this present climate. And my concern basically was relationship to barriers around the building. I'm not going to suggest we're going to get rammers, but it could be a case of somebody accidentally goes in reverse in the car park, and we've heard comments tonight about people trying to traverse the parking spots. It could be a case that they accidentally back into the building, and being not perhaps quite substantial as the pub itself, is it liable to be demolished, to be bluntly?
And who would you like?
And the question that is obviously to one of the planners.
Whilst the building is a timber-clad building, I think it will be probably concrete block or something with timber on the outside of it. I don't think it's quite the construction of a garden shed or something like that. In terms of ramming, there is the ramp at the front of the building as well, which may protect it. I think most people, given that it's being run in operation with the pub and they obviously have security for their cash takings, I'm sure that's something, security details, which would be considered by the applicants themselves. So I think it's a minimal risk.
Thank you, Mrs. Dutts.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Till, did you want to touch on that?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to point out that I think we're veering somewhat off the grounds of planning issues in terms of considering security aspects like that.
Thank you, Mr. Till. I've got Councillor Wollaston next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I walked around both the post office shop and the petrol station shop yesterday, and as far as I'm concerned, the competition issue is a real red herring. A farm shop is selling completely different things. The only thing I could see were apples and eggs that might be sold in the farm shop, but I think this whole issue comes down to parking, I'm afraid. Going back to 2013, there were 70 covers in this restaurant or pub restaurant.
Councillor Wollaston, do you have a question?
I do, it's coming.
Okay. I look forward to it.
I just need to give you the background before I can ask it.
Right.
There were 70 covers and 33 car parking spaces. Since then, it's extended over an external terrace, producing up to 200 covers. Now, when the measurements were taken by Mr. Goddard in February, those external tables would not be being used because of the weather. But in the summer, it's going to be very different. I just wonder whether he has a comment on that.
Mr. Goddard, then over to you, please.
Chairman, thank you. It's a good point. According to the images that were sent by the objectors, a handful of pictures were taken over the last 2 years, and they were taken all throughout the year. January, April, May, June, September, October, November and December. So therefore, I think we have taken our surveys during February and March at a reasonable time of the year. I accept it may be busier at times in the summer, but at the moment I've got no luxury or any evidence to say that the car park overspills more in the summer than what it does this time of the year. All I can suggest is that we've gathered the evidence accordingly, and I'm not saying that it doesn't overspill at times throughout the year, but I don't think it happens every weekend or every day. I think I'm repeating myself, so if I may, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Councillor Wilson, anything further to ask?
I don't agree, Chairman, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Okay, we'll put that into debate then. Councillor Camp, please.
Really sorry, Paul. It seems you're the victim of a lot of questions tonight, but just for complete clarity for me, and as I understand it, this application complies with the minimum requirement for parking spaces for the type of development. One, can I also just test you though very briefly on, as I understand it, if I haven't read this wrongly, there hasn't been any sort of road tracks. I always look for consequences to these things. So what if the car park overflows if they comply with planning consent? What's the consequence? Can I just confirm with you that, as far as I understand it, there hasn't been any road traffic accident involving an individual for 17 years, but that if there had been a series of road traffic accidents stretching back for a number of years at this particular spot, you would have taken that into account in considering your recommendations for the car parking area. But that isn't the case.
Well,
it doesn't seem to be a dangerous spot for people to cross. So irrespective of whether cars park on the street or not, there's no history of accidents as far as you're aware.
Mr. Goddard.
None. We have checked. We've also looked at the crash map, which anyone can look at online, and there's been no personal injury accidents in this location since 2005 near this pub. There have been some more on the A338 further to the north, but they're quite some distance away from this site. If that area in front of the public house was found to have a poor accident record. Absolutely, I would take that into consideration. And it may even have resulted in a different recommendation to you tonight.
Thank you. That's exactly what I expect you to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cant. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Members, any further questions of clarification of officers? If not, I will move this on to debate, please. And who would like to start me off there, please? Councillor Cole?
Thank you, Chairman. I haven't contributed to this till now. It's been an interesting set of questions. I veered towards approval of this. It's clearly within policy. Economically, on balance, it looks a good thing. Conservation officer, well, I can assure you that the conservation officer would have stuck to her guns if she possibly could have done. So I don't see that as an issue, and I'm supposed to be the heritage champion. It all, as been said already, appears to come down to parking. On balance, it seems that we probably cannot chuck this out purely on parking. That's my feeling, but I'd be interested to hear what others have to say.
Councillor Cole. Councillor Cant, is that a heritage hand, or did you want to come in? Yeah, I'll come to you. I think your hand was up first. I do apologise.
Chair. You know, I always feel very uncomfortable when we start to get into debates about the financial viability and the common sense of business practice or whatever it is in relation to planning applications, because that really is way beyond our remit and way beyond what we're really entitled to reflect on, I think. So I'm unconvinced by speculation about does it or doesn't it work, because it feels to me as though the applicants made a really big effort to try and make sure their goods are not similar to competing. They probably didn't have to do as much as they've done. It feels like they've done a lot more than they need to have done. I think, you know, if the pub car parking problem was such an issue, I've done it myself. If I go to a pub and it's regularly packed in a car park, I can't get a car parking space anymore. I don't go back. So that will be naturally resolving itself, I guess. I note particularly that there are 36 people who have voted in favour of this application or submitted a support for this application, compared to 28 objecting. And I know as well from my experience in planning committees that it's a lot easier to find objectors to things than to find supporters. So it also feels to me that the local feeling appears at least to be that this is going to be an asset to the village. I will be supporting the planning officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cant. I've got Councillor Vickers next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it was a very useful set of questions and very helpful set of answers. I think the questions about economic viability we needed to raise because they were matters of public concern, whether or not they were truly relevant to planning policy. But, you know, I think the public deserve to hear our professional officers giving us a firm answer on these things. I think the only Councillor Wilson's right to say that this is really down to me, and I think to most of us, parking is the big issue. I note that although policy trans 1, I'm looking at para 611 of the officer's report, requires parking provision to meet the needs of new development, it goes on to say that we don't, as a planning authority, have parking standards for public houses. I was particularly concerned and grateful to hear from Howard, Councillor Williston, that there has been a big growth in the numbers of covers. And I would have thought some sort of policy is needed in the future. Maybe this is something for an informative, or maybe just, you know, to be minuted, that we need to look at that so that we can meet trans 1 in the case of pubs. I mean, my conclusion, and I'm happy to propose that we support officers' recommendations. I think all the conditions are covering all the issues we've raised quite well, including the cycling one, which I see no development can start until officers have been satisfied with cycling parking provision. You know, I think when we get this type of application from a pub, we have a duty to think very look very carefully if we're going to refuse it, because this is on enterprise. This is a facility which we need for social and economic reasons, and there's got to be a jolly good reason to refuse it. And I'm persuaded that we have no good reason, and therefore I'm proposing that we support officers' recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. That is noted. And I will come in at that point and say you're quite right. I think we've focused, as have the residents and representations on the two major issues here. One is the impact on the existing shop and post office, and of course, sorry, just. Sorry, it's my train of thought there. One second. But while I do that, I'll go to Councillor Rolls, and then I'll give myself a slap around the face. And
so I believe Councillor Barnett's ahead.
Councillor Barnett.
Well, thank you, Councillor Rolls, not pointing that out. Chairman, I should be also supporting officers' recommendation. I would hope, and from the comments that have been made, that the actual items, provisions that will be sold in this shop will be perhaps to a clientele which might be local, might not be local, but I suspect it might well be residents or travellers or visitors that might not go to the other two shops or the service station shop. So I would expect that it's not a case of competition against them. I think it will be an extra group of customers. My initial concern, yes, was about the transport, the car parking, which has been, I think, widely concerned to several members, as well as obviously the comments that have been made on the background papers. But nevertheless, I'm sure it will be overcome, and one would hope that common sense would prevail at the end of the day. I think if this application had come forward some years ago when I was on the council, and I remember back in 2001 when I was called as chairman of West Berks to go up and investigate the flooding in that area, I might have thought completely different, because of course that area was underwater right away across the patch. Not very nice for the local residents, I might add. But having said that, yes, I should be supporting this application tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Members, forgive my Peppa Pig moment there. I do apologise. It was a question of having to juggle the technology, manage the meeting, and everything else. No, I won't. The shop was clearly the one of the two major concerns, the impact on that. Second, of course, parking. And I'd just like to say, I think it's hats off to the publican, and surely the very fact that we're looking at the parking is credit to the pub, and it's great to see what a luxury in this day and age to see a pub that's thriving, and all power to them. I've got Councillor Rolls next.
Thank you, Chair. I think you need to be a bit careful with the Peppa Pig reference. But anyway, yeah, I actually have a bit more difficulty than other members, maybe. So I fully support the arguments that members have put forward, and I too commend the landlords for being almost a victim of their own success, which is so lovely to see, as you say, particularly post-COVID, particularly in this current economic environment. And I also have a lot of respect for Mr. Goddard's recommendations and his thoughts and views on all the questions that we've asked, which I think have been incredibly helpful. I think my dilemma is that at the end of the day, it's not a huge car park. It's quite tight. I'm a bit concerned about lots of deliveries and, servicing the pub as well. And I'm just wondering if it's going to be able to accommodate it on what I think is actually quite a difficult stretch of road, albeit I think Mr. Goddard has allayed some of our concerns. So I am slightly a bit more balanced on this, and I'm just going to listen to the rest of the debate and then make my decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. I've got Councillor Williston next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I share the views of Councillor Rolls here. I'm very much divided on this one, I'm afraid. I'm just wondering if we could look perhaps at some of the conditions we might be able to apply, including, for example, the car park can't reduce from 27 or maybe 26. If it did go down to 23, it would be even more of a problem. Secondly, whether we can find a way of ensuring that it is used as a farm shop. And finally, I think it's already in there, but just confirmation that the previous applications were refused for a cafe, and this isn't a backdoor way into it. And that we are absolutely certain we can control that and enforce it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Williston. From my point of view on that last point, I believe, and I'll take advice from, if I can, with your indulgence, take advice from our planning officer, Mrs. Cutts, that is covered, I believe.
Yeah, the limitation on Class E is just for the sale of goods, so it can't be used as a cafe or a restaurant. So that limitation is there. It's very difficult on the type of goods sold. That is difficult to limit, given that the site is within a settlement boundary. It is in an area where we encourage limited services. So it would be very difficult for there to be a planning reason to limit the types of goods that are sold, and it would be quite difficult to enforce. Would we have planning officers going and visiting in perpetuity to check the items that are on the shelf? It is something that I have considered, but I think it's very difficult to enforce and difficult on the grounds of being reasonable. Thank you, Chairman.
Mrs. Cutts, thank you very much indeed. Mr. Till, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to strengthen what Mrs. Cutts has said. During the consideration of this application, I've supervised matters as her team leader and advised on enforceability of conditions. There is no way, in my professional view, that we could seek to limit the range of goods for sale, either in terms of reasonableness or in terms of providing any sensible route to enforcement of that. Additionally, it overlaps with what I said earlier regarding competition and us as the local planning authority not being in a position to seek at this grain of development to control reasonable competition between different outlets. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Mr. Till, once I've still got you there, the parking, any further reduction in parking, which Councillor Williston was alluding to, is that something, how can we deal with that?
We have a recommended condition in respect of parking, and actually a matter that came out of the questions was a suggestion that a revised parking plan should be submitted for approval by our highways officer. I would suggest that in proposing this application, should a member choose to do so, then they could propose that condition 11 is amended to require that the building is not taken into use until revised parking details are submitted and approved.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Williston.
Firstly,
I do apologise. Firstly, I accept the fact we can't condition the use of the shop. But I thought was probably the case. But I am concerned this is a backdoor again. So what's the difference then between selling a cup of coffee, which I would like to see stopped? What's the condition? What's stopped then going on to, oh, there's some sandwiches here you can come and get? Is there any way we can control that at all? If it's just a straightforward farm shop, personally, I would actually welcome a farm shop there. But what I don't want to see, as I said earlier, a backdoor route into the application that we refused.
Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. A hot food takeaway is actually a different use class from the proposed retail shop. It falls under a different development class within the use classes order. So in that respect, My view is that this can't be used as a back door. There would need to be an application for a change of use, and then that would require revisiting of all relevant material planning considerations in respect of whether that use was appropriate to the site.
Sorry, Chair, can I come back on one thing?
Please do.
On the parking, can we actually condition that the plan has to show 26 or 27 spaces, whatever it's going to be, and not 23?
Chairman, I think I'd like to take Mr Goddard's advice in terms of the specific parking numbers currently associated and desired for this development, just to make sure that we're not recommending a condition that can't be complied with.
Thank you, Mr Till. Mr Goddard.
Chairman, as mentioned earlier on, I'm content with the plan submitted and satisfied that 26 can be provided with one of the spaces being made into a space for disabled. I would resist the provision of just 23 spaces. As mentioned earlier on, we consider that one parking space is being lost from 27 to 26. And I think that's enough. Any more than that, and I think the parking levels at some lunch times is already tight on some days, and some days, as Councillor Williston mentioned, there is some overspill. So certainly not any less than 26. Hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Mr Goddard. Members, any further comment as far as the debate's concerned? No,
I have put a proposal, Chairman.
You
I
have
think you're
indeed,
aware of that.
Councillor Vickers, and that
to be
is-
seconded. I think we've covered everything personally.
Sorry, Chair, we just need to make sure the conditions with that proposal, because there was at the time, no condition attached to it.
So, Councillor Vickers, yes, the conditions that you'd like, we'll be happy to have.
Well, I think there was reference to a slight change in the parking to show disabled parking, but that's the only condition I recall having sort of received general agreement.
Councillor Vickers, you also had your own informative, I think, didn't you, as far as...
Yeah, the need for us to look at specific parking standards for public houses based upon the numbers of covers available.
Yeah.
And that would, of course, mean that you have to get planning permission to perhaps have extra covers outdoors.
But we can put that as an informative.
Yeah.
Certainly, Councillor Cant.
There was an amendment suggested by...
Sorry, Councillor Cant, your microphone, please.
Apologies. There was an amendment suggested, you probably didn't pick it up, that by Mr Till saying that they should amend one of the existing conditions to say that a final approval to the parking arrangements had to go to Paul Goddard before it's cleared.
Yeah, I think that's the point I made, that the parking drawings as they are at the moment are not quite up to it. So there needs to be a new plan on parking, which would, of course, have to be approved before development commences. Yeah.
Chairman, can I just confirm in respect of, before we go to a vote on this, so in respect of condition 11, we'd be looking at an amendment to state that the building wasn't taken into use until plans were submitted, showing the provision of 26 parking spaces to be retained on the site, including one disabled parking space.
Thank you, Mr Till. I think that was the finer points we were missing, I think. Thank you, Mr Till, for clarifying.
I'm now going to get tedious, but do we need, or is there any need to pick up the cycle rack provision in that condition?
There is a separate condition, I think, Chairman, for that.
Or can we say that should also include provision for cycle storage?
It's already there.
It's there already. So thank you, Councillor Vickers. So, Councillor Vickers, you're happy with those conditions?
I am, yes.
Alongside your proposal. Does that find a second? Councillor Cant, thank you very much. Members, I'll take a show of hands on the proposal to accept officer's recommendation with the conditions previously discussed. And against? Abstain? Abstain. That motion is carried. Thank you very much, members. Members, mindful of the time, would anyone like a glass of water? Or shall we crack on? No, I've had a hand, and I'll take a 5-minute.
Thank you, Chairman.
A 5-minute break. And thank you very much and welcome back. We now move on to item 4. And this is the Hunt Kennels Farm, Ermine Street, Lambourne Woodlands. Mrs. Kirby, presenting officer, would you like to begin your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chairman. This application seeks planning permission for the demolition of the existing kennel facilities and erection of a Class B8 commercial building at Hunt Kennels Farm, Ermine Street, Lambourne. Let me change screen. This item was brought to committee due to receiving over 10 letters of objection. The application site is located outside of settlement boundary within the AONB. The site has a detached dwelling to the south, and to the north of the site is an existing large barn and detached kennels, both of which are in poor condition. The site is accessed from an unnamed road which links Ermine Street to Hungerford Hill with a separate access for the dwelling. The proposed building will replace the existing barn and kennels, and replace them with a more modern steel framed building. Whilst the footprint of the building is to be larger than the existing buildings, the existing area has a large expanse of hard standing. The existing ridge height of the barn is 6 meters. The proposed barn will also be 6 meters and will measure 24.38 meters by 30.48, giving an approximate total floor space of 743 square meters. Planning policy CS10 states that existing small and medium-sized building enterprises within the rural area will be supported in order to provide local job opportunities and maintain the vitality of smaller rural settlements. Planning policy CS9 also states that the proposal for industry, distribution and storage will be directed to the district's defined protected employment areas and existing suitably located employment sites and premises. Any proposals for such uses outside these areas will be assessed by the council against the following: compatibility with uses in the area surrounding the proposal and potential impacts on those uses, capacity and impact on the road network and access by sustainable modes of transport. The application site does seek permission for B8 use outside settlement and protected employment area, although it is located close to an existing protected employment area, with the closest one being within 300 meters of the application site. Policy CS9 states that more efficient use of existing sites and premises should be made in order to attract inward investment, respond to modern business requirements, and meet the demand for employment land over the plan period. The council will promote the intensification, redevelopment, and upgrade of existing vacant and/or derelict employment sites and premises for business development. This proposal retains the existing access and hard standing for car parking. The highways officer was consulted and assessments were made. Highways data for the proposed use is provided in the design and access statement submitted. The expected HGV movements for the proposed use are for 2 to 3 HGVs per week, while a B8 general use could be used 2 to 3 HGV movements per day. Mr. Goddard will be able to expand on this further. It is noted that the highways officer did object on sustainability grounds, as the only means of travel to and from the site is by motor vehicle. This would then be contrary to national and local policies, the climate change emergency, and working towards carbon neutral for the district. This is noted, however, the previous use would have likely involved a number of vehicle movements for staff and deliveries, etc. This aerial view from 2018 does show a couple of vehicles on the site. This was before this applicant took over the site. Is believed that the proposal will involve relatively similar vehicle movements to that of the previous use, or it may in turn, there will be more vehicle movements. However, this is meant to be minimal. The details have been assessed and considered on balance to be acceptable based on a personal permission being applied for B8 use for Kingsley Smythe Limited. Whilst it's noted that the proposal is not considered to meet policy CS9, given that it's located outside of a protected employment area, this is outweighed by the economic benefits, as it is considered that the proposal will contribute and maintain a diverse rural economy. It is also considered to support business development and make efficient use of an existing site and encourage economic development. It is also considered that the proposals would result in some harm to the intrinsic character and appearance of the AONB. However, that harm would be limited due to the views of the site from the wider area. Whilst the proposed built form is larger, it will seek the demolition of an existing, unattractive, precarious mixture of buildings. It is noted that these images were taken before the storm. If you were out on the committee site visit, you will notice that there was further damage due to the recent storm. So it will see the demolition of this larger barn, for example, which, as you can see from the images, is in quite poor condition. It has been there for a vast number of years. The proposal also includes the enhancement of biodiversity through the implementation of biodiversity enhancement measures and soft landscaping scheme, therefore contributing to the wider environment dimensions of sustainable development. From the images, you can see the larger barn and the existing kennel buildings. There is already some existing landscaping, however, this is to be enhanced. This is the site currently looking from the applicant's dwelling, looking northeast. And this is the photo from the road taken in February, again before the storm, and there were some further clearance works. However, I will go back to the landscaping scheme just so you can. So further landscaping will be directed along the southern boundary with new saplings and to the eastern boundary, which will have new native hedging planting to help improve the visuals from the site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Kirby. Mr. Goddard, highways now. Do you have any comments you'd like to make on this application, please?
Yes, please, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. The existing use of the site is for kennels that house for drag hunt purposes. Up to 40 or more dogs were present on the site over the last 40 or so years. So the site is used to a level of vehicle movements, including larger vehicles using the existing access. The proposal before you is for a B8 use. For a B8 use, considering the building, the size of the building that's proposed, it would normally provide some 48 vehicle movements per day, 24 in, 24 out, including 2 or 3 HGVs in and out every day. However, that is not the proposal before you. The proposal before you is for use by Kingsley Smythe Limited, and they will have a much lower level of vehicle movements of some 4 in and 4 out per day and 2 or 3 HGVs a week. And this is being secured by a personal condition that is within your report. And I understand from the update, the planning officers have strengthened that condition a little bit to include the storage of garden and outdoor furniture, etc. That personal condition is very important because, notwithstanding the existing uses of the site, if we had 48 vehicle movements coming in and out of the site, your highway officers would have objected to this proposal on sustainability grounds. as was alluded to by Miss Kirby just now, the site is unsustainable. There's no other means of travelling there except by private car. So therefore, your highway officers are content with this proposal, subject to the personal condition for the particular storage use that is proposed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goddard. Okay, we now move on to our speakers on the application. Mr. Dunn, can I ask you to invite the representatives from Lambourne Parish Council into the meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I understand the representatives from the Parish
Of course,
Council.
you know, I've gone straight to the script. I should have turned around. I've got, thank you very much. I've got Sue Cocker and Bridget Jones, please.
Yeah, one speaker. It's me, Sue Cocker.
Sue Cocker, if you'd be good enough to, Sue, if you'd be good enough to come to the lectern there. Make sure your microphone's turned on.
It's the
button on the right-hand side. It should turn red.
Thank you.
Okay, you know how this goes. We've got 5 minutes in total.
Yep.
I'll give you warning with 1 minute left to go and 10 seconds left.
Is this working? Yeah.
It sounds
Okay.
good. Sounds good to me. Just bear with me 1 moment.
Right. Okay.
Sorry, if you just bear with me, well, just 1 moment. I'll get the clock ready, and when you're ready, off you go.
Okay. Hunt Kennels or Hearns Farm is surrounded by the open countryside of the AONB and residential properties. The land is currently designated as agricultural. Lambourne Parish Council appreciates that this application is for a family-run business, the owners of which live on the site. They have given verbal assurances that they are good neighbours, will not be operating large transporters or allow light pollution from their warehouse. However, planning permissions run with the land, not the owners. The applicants are taking an agricultural site and are repurposing it for industrial use. Is it necessary, in order for the applicant to carry out his garden furniture business, to have B8 use? Lambourne Parish Council is deeply concerned about the expansion of such sites for warehousing, open storage and distribution in the AONB, particularly when planning permission is given to sites like this one, which are outside the permitted employment area. The massing and scale of this new building, higher than the current single-storey buildings it will encompass, and at roof height 4 times the size of the existing footprint, all this makes it obvious that this is an unimaginatively designed industrial warehouse on what is, since previous planning permissions have lapsed, agricultural land. If permission is granted, it will effectively expand the Lambourne Woodlands industrial area, adding to the misery already suffered by many residents affected by traffic movements along local roads. This issue of B8 use deserves at least as much time spent on it as the car parking in the previous application. The committee report raises unanswered questions. It makes no reference to hours of operation once construction has finished. Could these be limited, or would this be yet another site where HGVs drive in and out at all hours? If not for this owner, then the next. What about the dangerous junction onto the B4000 Hungerford Hill? The application appears to suggest transporters accessing the site will be directed onto this, yet it is obviously unsuitable. The report refers to a personal condition to the applicant's limited company. According to government guidelines, this apparently cannot be given to a company except in cases of exceptional need, such as for housing development. What we ask exceptional need has been demonstrated in this application for a garden furniture business. Would a personal permission apply to any other business carried out on the site? We understand that the garden furniture business will operate March to September, but what will be happening on the site for the other 6 months of the year? Lambourne Parish Council ask you to look beyond the red line on the plan and show you understand and are responsive to local concerns. Please reject this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. And well within your 5 minutes. Members, questions, please. How about Councillor Vickers first, please?
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, you're right to say we should concentrate on this use class issue and the associated personal permission. But you use the term unimaginatively designed to refer to the warehouse. One could say the same about a lot of agricultural buildings in the AOMB, and we're not allowed to comment negatively on those. And would you object to a building like this if it was for an agricultural purpose, is my question.
I think we would be concerned about the massing and scale of it. We have already had, in our experience as a parish council, applications come in for large farm buildings and have expressed our concern about how they dominate the landscape.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. I've got Councillor Culver next, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, ladies, for coming along tonight. I noticed in the objections from Lambourne Parish Council, it says that you think it shouldn't be a B8, it should be an EG3. But when I looked that up online, to quote, it says uses which can be carried out in a residential area, ... industrial processes. So I'm a bit confused as to why you think that EG3 is relevant to this application. Could you expand on your understanding of the difference between those classes?
Yeah, I think this is the E class is new. We were looking for something other than B8. B8 encompasses so much that we really object to, and looking at what the alternatives were. We're not planners. We would hope that perhaps the planners might think outside the box on this one. Okay. But yes, it was the nearest we could come to something that might allow the applicant some leeway, but not to, down the line, have an expansion of an industrial area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Colbert. I've got Councillor Cant next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sue, sorry to keep you on the spot for longer. You did very well, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the fact I look back and see that there have been 2 applications refused historically for housing construction, basically, and 2 approved for hunt kennels. Can you recall whether the parish had any, although those were approved, so obviously they were approved, but did the parish have a more positive view about a hunt kennels development?
Before my time, I'm afraid.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cant. Councillor Rose.
Thank you, and thank you so much, ladies. Great presentation, I thought. Just a quick question from me. The existing buildings don't look particularly desirable and in pretty poor condition. I'm just interested, is your objection on the basis of the massing and scale you mentioned, and that's the sort of primary driver? Because obviously, to me, it looks like it might actually improve the site. Is that correct?
Yes, I think we would like to see it retaining its agricultural appearance. That, for example, that original barn before the storm got at it has that curved roof. Some nod in the general direction of the agricultural basis of that site would have been quite useful. It's the lack of thought as much as anything that drew our attention to this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Members, no further questions? Then thank you very much indeed. Councillors, thank you for your presentation. I've now got, we move on to objectors. I have Tony King. Mr. King, if you'd be good enough to take the lectern. And again, the same applies to you, sir. You have 5 minutes to address the committee, and the clock will begin. Just one moment, please. When you do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tony King and I live in Ermine Street in Lambourne Woodlands. I object to this application as the committee report is misleading and in my view should have been withdrawn. I've sent my detailed comments to the planning officer, copied to members of the planning committee. I have a few points to make on the misleading information included within the committee report and other documents. my colleagues have mentioned that the applicant is Kingsley Smythe. How can a personal permission be given to a limited company which can change their business model or ownership at any time? This means that this application is for B8 use, probably unrestricted, and all the analysis provided should reflect that. For unrestricted use, it is likely that much of this site will be impacted, so the area on the submitted plans in red is not correct and environmental screening is needed. The traffic generated, as shown in the submitted documents, is suppressed. With B8 use based on tricks, and has already been said by the highways officer, there will be 24 vehicles a day in and out, including 2 to 3 HGVs. There is no swept path analysis to show that the paved areas on the designated site can accept HGVs turning with the amount of parking that will be needed. If 2 HGVs arrive, then the narrow public access lane will be blocked. This site is not sustainable like all the industrial sites in the Membury area. There is no alternative safe access to this site other than by motorised road vehicles, and a change to this would require major investment. It is hard to understand how councillors that support a climate emergency policy can contemplate any industrial development on rural sites. Many references are made to the documents to existing buildings of previous use to justify the new build and new use. However, the previous use was restricted for rural pursuits, which has long expired. The previous operation by the hunt did not generate excessive noise, and there was little, if any, light pollution. The current proposals are for operation of a commercial storage shed in darkness hours with roof lights, open doors, and external lighting. This will damage the dark sky currently in the location. There are many references to the nearby Membury PEA to support the application. In fact, it is clear that this would be the best location for this facility with its unrestricted use. In summary, this application cannot use a personal permission in order to suppress all the impacts. It is for B8 use. The committee report has misled the committee, and in order to avoid legal challenges, this application should be refused. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. King. If you just stay there one moment, I'll look around the room and see if we have any questions members would like to ask you. I think you're free to go. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, moving on now to the applicant stroke agent, Chris Carey and Lucy Charman. If you'd be good enough to turn your microphone on, please.
Evening, Chairman, councillors.
If you just bear with me one moment, now you'll have 5 minutes between you, 5 minutes in total, okay?
Just myself.
Okay, so when you're good and ready, please begin.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Christopher Carey. I'm a senior rural charter surveyor for William Wallace with over 10 years planning experience, and I'm the agent acting on behalf of John and Leslie Locke. Miss Kirby has kindly outlined the details of the application, which, to reiterate once again, is to replace an existing unsightly, old, redundant kennel building with a single well-designed storage building to service the applicant's family-run furniture business. As you will see in the committee report, we received a number of objections to the proposed development, which raised some valid concerns. We were able to work alongside Mrs. Kirby to completely overcome these concerns with a number of planning conditions, which again are in your committee report. Firstly, I'd like to say a few other points, that the applicants are a hard-working, close-knit, multi-generational family running a successful garden furniture business, hoping to become an integral part of the local community. The purchase of Hurd's Farm offers the family the chance to consolidate the storage needs of the business to a single site, improving the profitability of the family business by reducing rental and travel costs. Mr. and Mrs. Locke have already relocated to Hurd's Farm permanently and hope to make it their family home and the hub of the business. Secondly, the existing buildings have historically served a purpose. However, due to their condition and age, now comes the time to replace them with a modern, well-designed structure. The size of the building will increase the overall footprint from 510 square metres to 743, so not the size have been heard by others. The roadside elevation is of similar length to the existing elevation on the roadside, and the footprint increase lies entirely within the existing hard standing on the site. A landscaping plan has been agreed to further lessen the impact of the development upon the area. Trees will be planted alongside the roadside, as well as between the main new building and the dwelling on site. Overall, we believe that the development presents a biodiversity net gain. Thirdly, the site lies 300 metres from a protected employment area, which is considered to be fully sustainable. So how is ours not? The latest West Berkshire Employment Land Review clearly states in paragraph 6 that, I quote, demand is evident for B8 distribution in close proximity to the M4 junctions. Paragraph 710 of the same review goes on to state, I quote, whilst not in a general market demand area, it is well located to address rural demand. The report concludes in saying that there is the need to deliver 62,000 square metres of commercial land in the area between 2020 and 2026, which is there in black and white. The highways officer has raised no objection. Obviously, we heard from him kindly to the application and was satisfied that there was a safe and suitable access to the site, and that proposed usage would see similar transport movements to the formal hunt kennels, which did create a significant amount of movements. Any concern regarding sustainability of the location has been balanced by the positive contribution to economic sustainability, alongside the fact that the owners actually live on site. So in terms of movements, some will be coming straight from the house. I would summarise by concluding that the principle of business use in the area around memory is supported, and it's acknowledged as being an area which is well located to address rural demand. The principle of supporting small rural businesses should be always supported. And from a national level, with the introduction with class after miss development, where we can bring agricultural buildings into commercial use easily, it's been put there at a national level for a reason. This is a strong material consideration, we believe. To conclude, the proposal will have a positive landscape impact, we believe. The current buildings are ugly, the new building is not, and it's standard agricultural construction. It's an off-the-shelf agricultural building nearly. Very limited impact from neighbouring amenity. The scheme will have a biodiversity net gain. And like we said, highways are not objecting to the scheme. That's me done.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. I did actually forget to give you a minute warning, but you've finished in time anyway. So
I did wonder.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. If you just stay there one moment, I've got Councillor Rolls who'd like to ask a question of you. Please, Councillor Rolls.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much for your presentation. I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. In terms that we've heard about HGV turning vehicles, etc., I just wondered about thoughts on anticipated amount of traffic in terms of HGV, heavy goods vehicles entering the site. I just wonder what the plans were in terms of how that's envisaged. And secondly, we heard from Lambourne Parish Council about the design in terms of making it a little bit more perhaps sympathetic in terms of agricultural look and feel. I wondered what your comments were on that, if you had any. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Firstly, it's a single building, and it's not that large. It is, like I said, it's 740 square metres. There's only so much they can fit in. We can't have 10 HGVs a day. It's just not possible. It's going to be 2 to 3 a week, and then the small movements with the small vehicles just to distribute. I think that does that clear your first point up?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Brilliant. And the second point.
Sympathetic agricultural
design. If I went to a builder, agricultural constructor of steel portal frames and asked for a round roof, I'd get laughed out the room. It's not standard construction. If you drive around West Berkshire, Wiltshire, you look at that barn and think, oh, it's a standard agricultural barn that's very accepted in the AONB.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I had noddings around the room from some fellow councillors, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rolls. I've got Councillor Barnett next, please.
Through you, Chairman. Obviously, you were mentioning the issue of garden furniture, and my thoughts were immediately treated timber, I would imagine. Now, thinking back some years ago, if you hadn't been in the chair this time, your previous chairman would have asked this question: is there going to be sprinklers in the building?
No, it's teak furniture. As far as I'm aware, it's untreated. If sprinklers in a building was something that you insisted on, I think we could easily put that as a condition of the application. I don't think it's necessary, but happy to listen to that if you would like.
Bear that one in mind. Thank you, Councillor Barnett. I've got Councillor Moore next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just referring to the report about the BREEAM possibility for this building, and it appears that it isn't required. But my simple question was is it proposed to heat the building in any way?
No, won't be heated. The doors are going to be open fairly regularly for movement, so no, not heated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Cant.
Thank you, Chair. Just so I'm absolutely clear, because I'm not completely clear still, in simple terms, this is going to be a warehouse for the importation of furniture and distribution nationally, or what's it? If
they love to be a national company, but they haven't. They're not of that size. It's more sort of local deliveries. They purchased furniture in, and obviously they're limited to how much
they're
they
a wholesaler effectively for imported furniture, operating an industrial warehouse, importing and distributing furniture.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted clarity on that, what the purpose of the business was. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Cant. Members, any further questions? No, I think you're done. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for your time.
We now move on to the board member, Councillor Howard Wollaston.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't be taking 5 minutes, don't worry.
Whenever you're ready.
I've met the applicant before at a Woodlands Protection Group meeting, and they are charming people. This is exactly the sort of business that we should be encouraging around Lambourne. Fairly small scale, but generating some local employment and relatively discreet. However, there is a but, and I'm afraid it is a big but. The site is in the AOMB, which is continually being squeezed by industrial planning applications, most recently Walkers for a 10,000 square metre distribution unit, and currently for an application for B8 warehouse use off one of the emergency access roads, the to and from Membry services. This is a relatively small unit, but enough is enough for my residents. The location is outside the protected employment area, the other side of the road from it, and is allocated for agricultural use. The dangers of planning precedents and the possibility of yet further development creep. The B4000 to junction 14 is already significantly overloaded, with both council and private readings showing that HGV traffic has doubled in the last 2 years. And many people are fearful of coming out of their drives because of speeding traffic. Albeit in a small way, this proposal can only further contribute to this major local issue. It is with great regret, therefore, that I must ask members to reject officers' recommendations and to not agree to this application, unless the personal consent can be fully enforced so that there is no long-term open B8 use. My apologies to the applicant, and I genuinely wish them well and a successful future for their business. This is just in the wrong location. Thank you, Chairman.
And thank you, Councillor Wollaston. Members, Councillor Cant, is that? Okay, then I've got Councillor Culver, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Councillor Wollaston, you mentioned about there's some extra buildings at Membry Services. Can you expand a little bit on, what is your understanding of the creep issue? What is beyond the protected employment area? If you could give me a bit more of an idea of that.
At the moment, there's nothing outside the PEA, and this would be the first one to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I had Councillor Rolls. No.
It was actually the same question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. No further questions of Councillor Wollaston, members, no? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Wollaston. We're going to move on to questions of officers. Councillor Cole, please. Your microphone, please, Councillor Cole.
My apologies, Chairman. Couple of questions. Firstly, a clarification. Am I right in thinking that there is no planning permission on this? This is truly agricultural land at present. Secondly, we're all interested, I think, in this question of whether or not a personal permission can really be granted and made to stick. What does that really mean? And lastly, as far as I'm concerned, how would we control the external lighting here if planning were given? If we get it wrong, this sort of building will end up looking as if it is lit up like a Christmas tree. So I'd be interested in answers to those.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. On your first point, agricultural land, we'll direct that to Ms. Kirby.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so the application previously was for the Hunt Kennels, and that was a personal permission. So that runs out as soon as they vacate the site. So currently it would revert back to agricultural use. And in terms of your second question about external lighting, we have recommended a condition in regards to limiting. They have to submit details of external lighting. I know it was raised about due to they have roof lights. The applicant and the agent have suggested that this is something that they could look at if it was a concern by the parish council. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Ms.
You
Kirby.
answered the first and the third.
The question was about the agricultural status of the land. I think Councillor Cole, was it not?
The second question was how we make a personal permission stick. That a personal, it just feels as if this sort of thing could roll on. Once a building is built, a building of this size, this is a reasonably substantial warehouse that is proposed. What's the reality if the current operators choose to move on? I suspect that the parish and others will have some doubt over this personal permission. How does this work?
Ms. Kirby?
Chairman, I think it would be appropriate for me to advise on
Thank you,
that.
Mr. Tull.
Members, you'll recall that this very issue actually raised itself in respect of walkers at the meeting that was considered at last year, where a personal permission was supported by the committee. In respect to this particular site, actually, Councillor Cole, the concerns that you're raising in terms of the future transfer of the site are exactly the justification that officers would use to strengthen the requirements of a condition by making it a personal permission. We have deep concerns ourselves as officers in terms of administration of policy and particularly in terms of vehicle movements and sustainability of the location, that the unrestricted B8 use of the site would be potentially of a level and intensity that would generate a harmful impact on both local highway network and vehicle movements, highway safety in the area, and also a harmful impact in terms of the increase of industrial activity within the AONB. The applicant has demonstrated to us, to our satisfaction as officers, that their particular business need would be of a threshold below those detrimental impacts. So attaching the personal permission is justified in order precisely to prevent the sort of uncontrolled BH use that the parish council have raised concerns regarding. And they've raised concerns in regard of the use class as well, seeking for officers to apply something more precise. Well, we're not applying something more precise because that would be beyond our remit. What we're applying is a very precise condition specifying both the nature of the business to be undertaken from the site and that it is attributed personally to the applicant themselves. It is a perfectly enforceable condition. Should the building change hands, then it would be in breach of the condition. Planning permission would need to be applied for. That planning permission would, that planning application would be subject to consideration of exactly the matters of highway safety and impact on the AONB that are raising themselves as concerns with the parish council in this case.
Thank you very much.
May I,
Councillor Cole?
just to clarify then, what you are saying is that if it did happen, that it moved on, for whatever reason, the building would not be saleable as is to all and sundry. Whoever took it on would find themselves back here, in effect.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Cole, I believe it's the business of a conveyancing solicitor to make sure they do the relevant checks on planning permissions when transferring hands on buildings. This would flag in such a check as
Excellent.
preventing a change of use. The change of use would essentially be instigated there by the fact that there was a personal permission granted.
Thank you.
And thank you, Councillor Cole. I've got Councillor Moore next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I note in passing my point from the previous application that we have another drawing with no height defined on it, but well, we'll take it as read that the 6 metres that's been mentioned is indeed what's expected here. Just to follow on from Mr. Till's comment there, I wasn't quite sure that in the conditions, and I think I've got number 3 on personal permission, that I quite understood how the restricted movement of vehicles and the size of those vehicles was came out of that. There's mention of it, but there doesn't seem to be much in the way of numbers there or anything. Perhaps Mr. Till could explain how that works.
Would you rather Mr. Goddard, do you think, or
whichever? Sorry,
whoever's happy to pick that one up, please.
I could pick that up. There's nothing in the conditions that actually talk specifics of vehicle numbers or sizes. Remember, large vehicles already with the current use would have entered and left the site. And I'm not anticipating the vehicles with this proposal to be any bigger than what was used for the kennels. It is while the conditions don't specifically limit vehicle numbers, the use prescribed does, and restricting the use to the applicants should restrict vehicles to that number. It's the personal consent with the condition on its own that should provide a level of restriction to actual vehicle numbers rather than them being specifically stated. I hope that helps.
Yeah, could I just come back? So there's a reference to the applicant has demonstrated through submission accompanying this application. So that is in effect then a referenced document, and that's where those numbers would come from. Is that right?
That is correct. The figures that I gave you for vehicles in and out per day and 2 or 3 HGVs a week is the figures that the applicant supplied, and I've no reason not to accept them.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. I've got Councillor Wollaston next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got three issues here. The first one is the continuation of Councillor Cole's question about the enforceability. In the event that, let's say, these people do to move on in 10 years' time, let's say, and so let's say this committee or subsequent committee refuses any other application, is there any sanction to make them demolish the building and return it to agricultural use?
So,
thank you, Chairman. Officers haven't recommended a condition in respect of removal of the building from the land, and that's basically because the previous consent for the hunt kennels themselves didn't have such a requirement, and as members have seen, since those buildings have been vacated, they haven't been removed from the land. However, if members considered that such a requirement was crucial to the preservation of the amenity of the AONB, for example, and that concern arose from debate, then it would certainly be something that I think could be justified as a requirement of a condition.
Thank you. Second question is on the elevational treatment. I may have missed it. I hope I haven't. There's no mention of the treatment on the external elevations at all. In particular, colour schemes. I'm thinking in terms of a dark green look, for example, would blend into the countryside quite well, whereas a bright red wouldn't.
Ms. Kirby, do you want to pick up on that one, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Yes, so on the application form, the materials have been stated and conditioned. The roof would be of steel corrugated sheeting in a grey, and then the walls would be a concrete wall panel up to 2 metres with a steel box profile cladding in green. If members feel that they would like samples of this, we can alter the condition so that that can be provided if that's felt necessary.
Thank you. My third question, I think has already been mentioned briefly, is the roof lights. I mean, the danger of light pollution from that number of roof lights is huge.
Thank you, Councillor. As when we were on the committee site visit, the applicant was on site as long with the agent, and they were willing to work with the council in terms of coming up with something to help reduce the impact of light pollution. They were happy to accept the condition on external lighting, so it may be something that we will be able to have a look at.
Thank you.
And on that point, Ms. Kirby, conditioning the effect of the roof lights causing spillage, causing light spillage beyond certain hours, perhaps.
Yes, yeah, we could perhaps look at conditions, or we could look at materials, so that you can probably change the materials to a more of a frosted roof appearance if needed. There are like options there that we can look at if found necessary.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Wilson, are you done there? Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Rolls, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've got 2 questions. My first one is regarding the trees screening the development. Could you just give me a bit more feel about the impact of that? Because my sense is that that's going to help reduce the impact on the local scene in the AONB. That was my first question. I just wanted to get a feel for the extent of that a little bit more. My second question is to Mr. Goddard. Just in terms of picking up on the ward members' concerns around the overall traffic along the road created by a number of other schemes, which I've sort of vaguely aware of, particularly the Membury one, but I haven't got a proper sense of the impact of that. We've largely focused on the number of HGVs going in and out of the site. So I wondered if you had further comments on that. My sense is that that is a non-issue for you, but it was just really picking up on the ward members' point about the sort of condensing of industrial units around the locality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. With that fresh in your mind?
Thank you. I share the concerns of the objectors that have spoken tonight in the Lambourne Woodlands group, and I have regular meetings, including with Councillor Williston, on this issue. and we've done our own traffic counts, and the number of HGVs along the B4000 is ever increasing as a result of developments at Membury. Members may, I can't remember the specific numbers offhand, but members may recall when the Walker's planning application came to committee, your highway officers did object to it. And we objected to it particularly on grounds of sustainability, increasing traffic and HGVs in areas where there were no other means of travel. And with this proposal, if it wasn't for the personal consent that limits all those those vehicle movements in such a way, a similar objection would be raised. But the personal consent is before you, and therefore no objection is raised. But that personal consent is absolutely pivotal from Highway's point of view. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I just got a supplemental to that. Does that not encourage other local businesses to do the same, which is going to have the overall impact of more and more traffic? Am I right in saying that? In that ordinarily you would object to it unless it was a personal application piece, that others could do the same, and actually we could have many of these applications going through on that basis?
It does depend on each planning application assessing its merits. It does also depend on the existing use of the site. In this case, you do have an existing use that works in its favour. If, let's say, it was a completely new site that this was put on, a different point of view may have been taken, because then it's still an increase in vehicle movements from what was there before. But in this case, we're looking at similar numbers with the personal consent. So we will assess each application its merits. And if I feel and consider that there is an increase in vehicle movements in this area from what was there before, then it's highly likely that the local highway authority would object going forward. That helps.
Mr. Goddard. And your first question, Councillor
Regarding
Rolls.
the trees, just in terms of the extent of the screening, I just like to get a better feel of that. Thank you.
Ms. Kirby.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. A landscaping or planting schedule was submitted with the application, and this will allow for five trees to be planted along the southern boundary between the applicant's dwelling and the building, but also along the eastern boundary will be another 3 lime saplings to be planted along with native hedging. This has been conditioned, and on the update sheet, it's changed to be in accordance with the submitted details. And this goes on to say that any diseased or seriously damaged within 5 years of completion, that they must be replaced. So if any of the saplings do not survive, this means that they will be replaced, and that is conditioned. The existing hedgerow was removed due to its poor quality, and some dead trees, etc., were in there. However, this new landscaping is proposed to help screen the new proposal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I've got Councillor Colvin next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, 2 questions. I'll ask them one at a time this time. Bearing in mind that the permission is going to be given to a company rather than an individual, in theory, were that company to be sold to somebody else and they were to come along and say, well, it's got a B8 condition, so I'm actually going to do something else with it, what would happen at that point in time in terms of planning enforcement? Would we have a leg to stand on to say, well, hold on a minute, this was only supposed to be for furniture? Or would the owner of the property quite reasonably be able to say, well, it's B8, so sling your hook, we're going to do what we want?
Mr. Till, do you want to pick that one up?
Thank you, Chairman. You'll see in your update sheet that there is actually an amendment proposed to condition, I think it's 11. No, it's not 11. The personal permission condition, condition 3, which is that it limits the use to Class B8 for the purposes of storage and distribution of furniture. So there is additional comfort within the wording of the condition itself that it's specific to the nature of the applicant's business.
And that would stand up in court, would it, if we were challenged? That wording. Have we got any precedent for putting such a specific use on a B8?
Councillor Culver, thank you for your question. The requirement of the MPPF is for conditions to be as precise as possible in outlining their requirements. So in terms of appealing against the condition or seeking to overturn it, provided the justification for the condition is there, which it clearly is in my view in this case, and the requirements of the condition are set out to be precise, then in the spirit of the MPPF, the condition should hold water. That is the purpose of seeking more precise wording for a condition.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Till.
Your second question, Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. With regard to the SUDs under the drainage section 630, is it not usually the case that we would expect the applicant to submit a surface water drainage strategy as part of the application? And with regard to the condition, in the update sheet, there's a longer list of conditions relating to the SUDs, and they're kind of jumbled up compared with the original pack. So I wonder if officers could briefly summarise what you have added to these conditions that wasn't in the previous pack.
Who'd like to pick that
They're in a
one?
different order, and it seems that one has been removed because it only goes up to K in the update pack, and it went up to L in the main pack.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. Who'd like to touch on that?
I'm happy to
Thank you.
take that question. Yes, so further information was submitted by the agent in terms of, as the site has an existing soakaway. I consulted the drainage officer on that, and he was not happy to accept the existing soakaway, given that it was most likely going to be of some age. He was happy that this could be conditioned, but he requested that a suitable SUDS condition was added, and this is the condition that he suggested himself, as he was not happy with the previous one, just because he added some additional points that were specific to this site, and also to include environmental measures such as groundwater quality for new habitats, etc. I hope that answers your question.
Councillor Culver.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I've got Councillor Vickers next then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we haven't, it's a new topic, but it was referred to by Mrs. Cocker. That's the access to the site. Could we condition it? This is a question for Mr. Goddard, really, that access is only for the business purposes, not for private purposes, obviously. For business purposes, is directly off Ermine Street and not directly off the B4000 off that very sharp and dangerous, difficult bend.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Mr. Goddard, please.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm a little difficulty answering, understanding the question. The access into the site is existing and would be used by the proposal is my understanding.
So
and therefore,
Mr. Goddard, you've broken up there one moment. If Councillor Vickers can just restate his point, and you can come back on that.
Yeah, it's not so much the immediate access, but the final part of the route. You've got that minor road that connects the B4000 with Ermine Street near the entrance to the PEA. Instead of approaching from the north, we would want it to approach from the south, which is the obvious way. It's the way I came to the site, because you don't have that awkward bend. So would that be a condition? Because I think it's reasonable to require it for any size of vehicle, above an ordinary car.
Could that be conditioned then, Mr. Goddard?
Chairman, I think it might be appropriate that I respond in terms of the potential for planning conditions to control matters that are outside of the application site. No, in this particular case, we would be looking at both concerns in terms of the works that you're proposing to route traffic being outside of the application site, taking place on public highway land, and in terms of imposing requirements again on private vehicle operators and drivers that would be beyond the applicant's control entirely, I'm afraid, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Till. And that, I think, concludes questions of officers. Members, I'm going to move this on now to debate. Who'd like to start me off, please? Councillor Cant.
Thank you, Chair. I guess, although there's some very interesting issues being raised about conditions and colours of outside of buildings and trees and things, I still can't quite, for my own purposes, get past the question in my mind, were this to come to us from an individual who just acquired this property and was saying, I'd like to do something which doesn't comply with the AONB, and despite earlier applications that have been successful which do comply with the issue about the purpose and use should be related to agriculture and rural activities, but I want to do something completely different. I'd like to actually run a commercial business out of a warehouse that I'm building on this land. I sort of sense we wouldn't do that. And I'm not sure I'm comfortable myself with the theory that for whatever reason, an individual has got themselves in a position where we give them a favourable disposition on an application merely because we feel that's the right thing to do for them as a personal thing. I'm very wary about, normally grubby old buildings, I'm right behind knocking them down and putting up decent ones, but the ones we've had in the past have been converted for agricultural purposes. I'm just really, really uncomfortable with looking at a proposition which is basically opening up a brand new commercial industrial warehouse on what appears on the face of it to be a restricted area where we shouldn't be allowing it.
Thank you, Councillor Cant. I've got Councillor Vickers next, please.
Chairman, yes, this is, colleagues, this has been another very interesting one where I think the officers have tried hard to do what Councillor Wollaston, the ward member, said. You know, this is a local person who, you know, we should be encouraging, as I think it's CS10 says, small and medium-sized businesses to be sustained. And on the other hand, I'm concerned about this creep outside of the PA. But I do think we have conditions that can be enforced and are reasonable and necessary to allow us to approve this. I was minded to think, you know, in my question and answer to and from Councillor Cocker, yes, this could be, should the personal permission expire and the business fail, you have got a building which could quite easily revert to agricultural use. So I can't see where the harm is in any circumstance. And the benefit is you are getting rid of a very rundown, more or less derelict building, which, although it may look sort of semi-agricultural, is not very attractive. So I'm kind of minded to support officers on this, but I'll wait to hear what other people say. I think we've covered it.
Thank you for that, Councillor Vickers. I've got Councillor Barnett.
Well, Chairman, members, I'm sort of totally undecided in this. I've obviously taken note of the ward member, as I regularly do, because I always think ward members know best, or at least I hope they do. I try and promote things in my ward and hope people take note. But in regarding some of the practical issues here, one obviously does like to look at entrepreneurial operations and look very much at the thoughts of the local people that were looking to either sell or store their wares where they feel that there's a need for this sort of thing. I have a little concern about the aspect of, and the answer was given to me, it was untreated for timber. I do have a bit of concern about the storage of this. There's been many occasions in the UK where there's been problems with untreated materials where there hasn't been any sprinkler devices, and I would hope that if it ever come that this proposal did go through, that sprinklers would be part of the condition. But nevertheless, my personal view is that the site, and I think this is what the ward member was trying to explain, it was actually the wrong site, and it was a possible operation which really should be in another location. And this location, to me, I have some concern regarding the access. You've heard that from other members as well. And overall, I still feel that my heart's in the operation, my heart's in the proposal, but the practicality is it's not really a suitable place. So I'm going to wait for the rest of the comments being made around the table before I decide which way to vote.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. From my point of view, for what it's worth, I think I agree with a lot of Councillor Vickers' points, and I do want to make the point that with the last permission, when it was an operating hunt kennel, that didn't come without vehicle movements. There were on occasion considerable vehicle movements, and personally speaking, I've been on site when they've hosted a drag hunt, and some sizable vehicles have been on site in some considerable number. So we're not inventing the wheel here as far as that is concerned. That's my 2 pence worth. Councillor Williston, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just thinking further. I just wonder whether there's any scope for us to give this consent as an agricultural building with a one-off agreement that it be used by the applicant, so that if the applicant decides not to continue his business, it reverts to an agricultural barn.
That is a question I'd suggest to Councillor Till. I've demoted you, Mr. Till. I do apologise. Mr. Till.
Promoted there, Chairman.
No. I was right first time.
Councillor Williston, in respect of the proposal to impose a condition requiring that the use alters to agricultural once the use of the building cease. It's perhaps pertinent to note that the building would no longer have planning permission for any use once the applicant's use of the building ceases, and the default condition of land where there is no other planning permission for use is agricultural. So the building would effectively revert to an agricultural planning permission at the point of the use ceasing. That's unless there was a condition requirement for demolition of the building.
So that would not need conditioning in that instance then, Mr. Till?
I would suggest that the change of use would be implied once, once the use had ceased.
Thank you very much for clearing that up. I've got Councillor Cole next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to comment that a reversion to agricultural usage for that building is, of course, perfectly feasible. It could, for example, be used as a cattle barn, just as a simple example. So I don't see a problem in that. If we were able to get conditions tightened down, particularly on something like the external lighting and lighting spillage, then I might certainly move towards being prepared to
go for it.
If that's a thought.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Could we also consider perhaps hours of lighting as well? Perhaps that's something we might consider. I've got Councillor Kant next, please.
Sorry, I'm saying more than I should tonight, but it's I suppose this will become a question for Mr. Till, really, in a way. I suppose I'm still fretting about the fact that aren't we potentially opening a door here which says that so far we've refused to allow industrial use of farm buildings in designated areas where it's agricultural land and or an AONB. But if you come to us and ask, we've now set a precedent that says on a personal level, we'd be happy to consider any business you care to operate from one of these buildings, because that's what we've done for this individual. So yeah, off we go. I'm just very concerned that that feels like the way this is going. And we've either got a policy that says no industrial commercial businesses from agricultural land, or we haven't. Now, you know, I just don't see this distinction of saying, well, because it's this person, you know, if I was someone else with an agricultural building of a similar type nearby, I'd then come along and say, this is excellent. This guy's running a furniture business out of his old barn. I've got an old barn. I want to do agricultural machinery and repairs in it. Well, why not? This guy's doing it. And, you know, I've got some sympathy with that concept of letting much more commercial enterprise take place in old farm buildings. But as far as I understand it, at the moment we are resisting that because there are other places they can do it. And I don't get that we're suddenly saying this is an exception to the fact that because presumably there are other places this could be done from. So I'm just still very, very nervous about this, and I will be voting against it.
Okay. Is that a question to Mr. Till? Mr. Till, do you, we are in debate, I know, but yeah, sure. Mr. Till, do you want to come back on that before we go back to members?
Thank you, Chairman. I do think some comments from me would be of assistance to members in the debate. And really, the first thing that I should note in respect of this matter is that this is a very unbalanced recommendation from your officers, members. This is very much in consideration of the specifics of the previous use of this site and of the nature of the applicant's own business. And in the spirit of taking each planning application on its individual merits. So there may be approaches from other people with proposals for industrial uses, and some of those officers may support, given the scale, the nature of the uses proposed, the compatibility. We have a policy that states that we should consider the compatibility of the use with surrounding land uses. Now, officers have taken the view in this particular case that we consider, on balance, the use proposed to be compatible, and on balance, the material impacts to be acceptable, and on balance, that this falls within the requirements of policy. If members were to take an alternative view, I would obviously be seeking details in terms of why that alternative view would be taken, but there are potentially perfectly defensible positions in terms of planning reasons for refusing the application. And that is, after all, why, particularly with a very unbalanced recommendation and a difficult scheme to determine like this, it is appropriate for the committee to consider an application like this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Till. I'm now going to turn to Councillor Rolls, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I sort of share concerns of members, and that was very helpful from Mr. Till, actually. But I think in my mind, and it is sort of a question, if you don't mind, I know we're in debate, but if this company was taken over, I'm not sure if this has been raised, but if it was taken over, it was acquired by another company, and it's still carried on as trading as the same company, but under a different trading name, for example, does that mean that the use would continue?
And that's to Mr. Till?
I think so, if he can help.
Thank you, Chairman. I think in this particular case, there may be a case for strengthening the condition even further to refer to the applicant as named, trading under or trading as the company as named. So there is a potential for strengthening the condition even further. I understand members' concerns that the business might change hands. There is an additional requirement within the condition stating that the use shall be for the purposes of storage and distribution of furniture, which limits the use quite severely in terms of the nature of the business that can be operated out of it. Your officer's view is that is sufficient in terms of the personal permission.
Thank you. Sorry, can I just, I'm sorry to turn this into questions. I don't mean to, but I think it helps shape the arguments and debates. Is this something, and this is to Mr. Till, is this, I'm thinking about the district-wide implications. Is this something that we've seen on other applications where we have this personal condition, this personal piece, or is this a rare thing? I just want to understand if we are setting a precedent that is a bit dangerous, but I'm in your hands.
Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. There are rare instances of justification for a personal permission. I've come across very few in a 10-year career. A 10-year career as a planning officer and somewhat longer than that in planning itself. It's seldom used except where it reflects the specific circumstances, the particular circumstances of the site. Where, for example, we had no concerns about the site changing hands over to another operator in that use, then we wouldn't recommend a personal permission. Where we had concerns that a use was entirely unacceptable and weren't satisfied that the applicant's personal circumstances justified a personal permission, we would recommend refusal. So falling between those two is not a circumstance that occurs very often at all. I've referred to one granted last year that I'm aware of, and I'm not aware of any others in my time as a planning officer that I've been involved in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Till. I've got Councillor Vickers next, please.
Chairman, I think this has been a really good debate and we've taken a great deal of care over it, but I've heard nothing since I started by saying last time that I was minded to approve it. I've heard nothing that changes my mind. Indeed, Mr. Till has satisfied me that this is a unique set of circumstances. An existing business from an existing local resident who owns and lives in the site adjacent and happens to include within their property a derelict rundown building which needs to be got rid of and replaced to enable him to continue with his business. I would be concerned if there was a good chance of this setting a precedent, but I'm not, Chairman. So I do think we've covered all the bases, and I would like to formally propose that we support officers' recommendations with a couple of conditions to be strengthened. Firstly, I think we do need to mention particularly the specifications and the materials, although I think condition
I think that's covered.
5, I think it is in, materials as specified. I think it's probably covered, but with the lighting, I mean, I think we can combine hours of work with lighting from the roof lights, because if you install movement sensitive lights, as soon as everybody shuts the door and closes down, unless there's an awful lot of large rats moving around, then, the lights will go out. So, and that would also cover the situation even during working hours when there's no deliveries being delivered and no goods being collected. So I think we can cover it all. And I think the conditions with a minor bit of strengthening can cover it. So I look to hope that we don't have to extend our hours and that we can get this carried one with the other before 10.
Thank you very much, Councillor Vickers. So that I have a proposal there. Does that find a seconder? Councillor Moore, thank you very much. Members, I shall put this to the vote.
Chairman, before you do so, can I just make sure that I've clarified specifically in terms of amendments, conditions, additional conditions? So what I've picked up from Councillor Vickers and the debate are that we would like condition 3 amended, condition 3, the materials condition, sorry, 5, to specify that details are provided of external materials and finishes before any above ground works commence. And we would like details of the roof lights and measures to prevent external lighting overspill, including where necessary, lighting timers for the building or other lighting controls to be provided before the building's taken into use. And I think...
Did we have, Mr. Till, I'm sorry, did we have a named personal permission?
Yes, there was discussion over whether the applicant's personal name should also be associated with the company in terms of the personal permission.
And your understanding that that was the extent of the conditions that members...
Those are the conditions that I know.
Councillor Vickers, I'm going to come back to you. Would you be...
If that, I'd be happy to accept that if it's seconded and if officers think it's a reasonable thing to do, reasonable and necessary. I think we have to have.
Councillor Moore,
yeah, I'd like to second that as well. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just clarify that point about the trading name? I think that was the point, yes, about the trading as. That was the point Mr. Till was making, I think. Is that right?
So the discussion was that the applicant would be named personally, trading as, and the company name in the condition.
Councillor Barnett, I've got your hand there, but we're about to go to a vote. Is this something you want to...
Well, I just wanted a clarification on the point which Councillor Vickers made. He's obviously trying to alleviate the concerns of the light pollution in relationship to control on some of these lighting activities. But I have to say, it's not so straightforward as all that. They activate with wind, with movements of trees, as well as animals.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Thank you. I'm going to take the proposal as seconded by Councillor Moore, and I'll take a show of hands, then, members, to accept officer's recommendation with the conditions we've just discussed. Members, those in favour, please. That's 1, 2, 3, 4.
5.
Councillor Rolls, is that your hand at the bottom?
Yeah.
Thank you.
5.
Members, those against, please. So that is carried. Thank you very much indeed. 5-4, Councillor Wilson. Members, thank you very much. Members of the public also, thank you very much indeed. Again, as always, a fascinating Western area planning, one not quite as late as usual, so there's a chance for a swift half before bedtime. Can everyone please remain in the Zoom until we've been advised the live stream has stopped? And please, can you please wipe down your tables, please, before we go? Thank you very much indeed, and good night.